Chapter 777. Rinpoche's expression changed. He knew that he couldn't hide this matter, so he said softly, "Lin Shaola is in the forest. Lin Shaola is in the forest. What about Gongzheng?" The Empress was a little surprised and happy. "I didn't see her." Rinpoche shook his head. "What's the situation with Lin Shaola?" The Empress asked again. "What's the situation with Lin Shaola?" The Empress asked again. "I'm not sure," Rinpoche said hesitantly. The Empress instantly appeared beside him, took the binoculars from his hand, looked ahead, and asked, "Where is she?" However, she saw it without Rinpoche's help. Rinpoche felt a gust of wind blow past him. From the corner of his eye, he saw a red figure flash and disappear. "Brother-in-law, Her Majesty has rushed over." Rinpoche shouted at the bottom of the tree and followed her. The forest was like a group of demons dancing in a frenzy. Groups of jade-wasted slaves filled the forest, lying on the ground or on the tree trunks, causing the forest to be filled with a dark green glow. Occasionally, a jade-wasted slave would fly up, and it was a breathtakingly beautiful sight. If one were to say that it was a beautiful scenery, then this forest was a little strange. A pretty girl in a dirty tube top and shorts was in the forest. From time to time, she would pounce on a group of jade-wasted slaves, scaring them into the air. The girl would grab one and stuff it into her mouth as if she was tasting something delicious. She closed her eyes and reveled in it for a moment. Not long after, the girl curled up on the ground, either because she was full or because she was tired. She hugged her knees and curled up as much as possible, just like a baby in a mother's womb. At this time, a red figure landed in front of the forest and stared at the girl. "Lin Shaola." The Empress's voice was cold and full of murderous intent. In fact, the Empress and Lin Shaola had a good relationship. Lin Shaola had been in the palace longer than the Empress, and she always had the image of a young girl. When the Empress was young, she felt that Lin Shaola was like an elder sister. As she gradually grew up, Lin Shaola became a younger sister. Although they didn't have a deep relationship, it wasn't shallow. Therefore, when Lin Shaola got the white rabbit creamy candy from Rinpoche, she immediately ran to the Empress to present it. It was precisely because of their friendship that Lin Shaola appeared here after Gongzheng disappeared. One could imagine how furious the Empress was. The Empress's appearance instantly startled the jade-wasted slaves in the forest. They flew up and circled in the air like ribbons of lights. Lin Shaola's curled-up body was now lying on the ground. Her limbs were maintained at a certain angle, as if she was ready to pounce at any time. A small face stared at the Empress expressionlessly. "You want to fight with me?" Looking at this situation, the Water Empress laughed. However, even Rinpoche, who was chasing after him, could feel the killing intent as if he was being pricked by needles. "Your Majesty," Rinpoche landed behind the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, don't be anxious. Lin Shaola is a little strange." Since when did Lin Shaola dare to act like an animal in front of His Majesty? This in itself isn't normal, Rinpoche said anxiously. The Empress gradually calmed down after hearing what Rinpoche said. "You're right." Rinpoche carefully stared at Lin Shaola and said, "Your Majesty, look at her eyes. They have vertical pupils." The Empress looked at Lin Shaola seriously. Indeed, as Rinpoche said, Lin Shaola's pupils were vertical and oval. There was even a little green color hidden in her pupils. "Your Majesty, do you still remember that boar asked us for our names back then?" After that, the second herdsman also asked us about our names. I was curious about what would happen if they knew our names. Now that I see Lin Shaola's condition, I have some conjectures. If those herdsmen can control a person through their name, then it makes sense. That explained why the ancient race beings would come here without a sound and die in silence one by one. It also makes sense why Lin Shaola became like this, Rinpoche said thoughtfully. The Empress remained silent after hearing this. Rinpoche's conjecture seemed to be very likely. She suddenly felt a sense of anticipation and hoped that things were really as Rinpoche said. If possible, She didn't want to kill this girl, who hadn't changed much in more than 20 years. Qi Ziding, Ba Man, and the others landed beside the Empress and looked at the dancing, jade-wasted slaves in the forest. Most importantly, they looked at the girl lying on the ground. "What's this?" Qi Ziding asked with a frown. "Lin Xiaola," Ren Baqian suddenly shouted. Lin Xiaola, who was lying on the ground, suddenly shivered. Her pupils narrowed as if she was startled by Ren Baqian's sudden shout. At this moment, a burst of desolate music rang out. The jade-wasted slaves flew in the direction of sound. Lin Xiaola lay on the ground and retreated more than 10 steps. Seeing that no one had any intention of attacking, she turned around and quickly fled into the forest. "Go!" The Empress only said one word before slowly walking into the depths of the forest. At this point, hiding wasn't important anymore. The important thing was to take down Lin Xiaola and this herdsman. Not long after they entered the forest, Ren Baqian suddenly stopped and said with an indescribable emotion, "Your Majesty, I see Gongzheng." The Empress turned her head abruptly and saw that he was staring at a tree. On the bark of that tree, there was a human face. The appearance of that face sent a chill down the Empress's spine. It was Gongzheng. The face on the tree was distorted, full of pain, and its mouth was wide open. Although it appeared on the surface of a tree's bark and was somewhat different from a human body, one could still tell that it looked very similar to Gongzheng. "Captain of the winged cavalry?" Qi Ziding asked. He looked at the face on the tree and swung his walking stick at it. "Living like this is worse than death." Bang! The Empress swung her walking stick away. "Why stop me?" Qi Ziding looked at the Empress. "This tree is him, right? It's better to die than to live like this. Capture Lin Xiaola and the herdsman first, then come back and deal with this place. Maybe we can find out something after we capture the herdsman," Ren Baqian said. He finally knew why he felt that the forest was strange before. It turned out that this forest that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws was transformed from a single person. This truth was simply terrifying. At this moment, he still held onto a glimmer of hope that the herdsman could actually transform people like this. Perhaps there was a way to save them. However, he also knew that this hope was extremely slim. "Get someone to keep an eye on this place. Let's go." After saying this, the Empress turned away from the tree and walked into the depths of the forest with a solemn expression. Her red dress fluttered despite the absence of wind. Her hair also fluttered behind her. With the Empress as the center, the coldness spread in all directions, causing everyone to feel cold all over. Chapter 778. Before the group left the forest, they saw a large green light surging towards them. "Gather in place and get ready to kill," Qi Ziding shouted. "Kill!" More than 1,000 winged cavalry warriors shouted at the same time. The leaves in the forest shot up into the sky, forming a green pillar that connected to the sky. It was as if everyone's murderous aura had condensed into a substance. The trees and strange rocks in front of the winged cavalry were flattened and charged toward the incoming jade-wasted slaves. The jade-wasted slaves danced in the air and drew an arc in the crowd from time to time. The winged cavalry warriors and jade-wasted slaves were armed with mace, giant axe, long saber, and long stick that was as thick as an arm. Some of them even used the thigh bones of unknown beasts as weapons. These weapons were like bears dancing with butterflies against these little guys. The scene wasn't very pleasant. The winged cavalry warriors, who had great strength and rough moves, hated these small and agile opponents the most. Moreover, the jade-wasted slaves had the advantage in numbers, and there were at least 10,000 of them. Fortunately, the average strength of the jade-wasted slaves was only at the man-wheel level or even lower. Although they were agile, they were much slower than the winged cavalry warriors. The scene was ugly, and hundreds of jade-wasted slaves fell every minute. However, there were more than 10,000 jade-wasted slaves in the training hall, and there were 1,600 winged cavalry warriors. This kind of speed was rather slow. Those jade-wasted slaves have a formation. Rinpoche discovered this problem with a glance. Although the jade-waisted slaves were falling in large numbers, they were on the whole in an orderly manner. There was also a flute-like music coming from afar, which must be how the jade-waisted slaves were commanded. Not bad. The Empress nodded. After Bor's death, the jade-waisted slaves didn't know what to do and circled in front of the mountain. This was how they were eliminated by the winged cavalry with minimal effort. The guards behind Rinpoche opened a box and threw a bunch of glass bottles at the crowd. As the insecticide quickly spread in the air, the scene immediately changed, and the jade-waisted slaves in the air began to slow down. At this time, being slow meant death. The jade-waisted slaves that were flying in the air suddenly fell like rain. The winged cavalry warriors at the scene immediately let out a carefree laughter. Even though these little things weren't considered strong, they were very troublesome to deal with. Once these transparent crystals were thrown over, these things would fall one after another. Even a mace would be able to hit one or two of them. At this moment, a black shadow suddenly darted into the arena and headed straight for the boxes behind Rinpoche. Bang! With a wave of the Empress's palm, that figure was immediately sent flying. His head was upside down, and his limbs were grabbing onto the tree trunk. He flashed his canine teeth at the Empress with a fierce look on his face. Although Lin Shaola's face looked fierce no matter how one looked at it, at this time, when paired with the 2-inch-long nails and a pair of vertical pupils, it looked a little creepy. Hee 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 hee. A silvery bell-like laughter came from the darkness. There are so many guests today. They were all top-notch nourishment. Should I thank you for coming to my door? Try to mystify us. The Empress kicked a rock and ran into the darkness. Come out. 10 breaths later, the herdsman in the darkness looked behind him with a puzzled expression. Who was he hitting? No one was there. However, he quickly suppressed his doubts and looked at the Empress and the rest in the forest. He let out a crisp laugh and said, This half-human with an ancient bloodline is yours, right? I didn't expect to meet her here. How lucky. Unfortunately, you came too early. If you had come a little later, I could have trained her and shown you the true power of the ancient bloodline. Are you referring to the chinchilla bloodline? Rinpoche raised his voice and asked. He had heard this from Chi Zitting. You actually know about it? The herdsman was puzzled at first, but then understood. She has been like this because you don't know how to stimulate the chinchilla bloodline. It's a pity that you have such a powerful weapon but don't know how to use it. But that's right. You abandoned people have long forgotten about those things. It's already beyond my expectations to know that she has the chinchilla bloodline. Abandoned people? What do you mean? The Empress asked coldly. Hee, since you have forgotten about it, I won't tell you. The herdsman in the darkness said. You will die if you don't finish your sentence. Rinpoche sighed. Die. You can talk after you defeat the half-human with the chinchilla bloodline. The herdsman laughed in the darkness. Then, the sound of a flute could be heard. Lin Shaola's face revealed a painful expression. Her teeth began to grow longer, and her body seemed to have grown a size larger. Her clothes were tightly wrapped around her body. A pair of A's had become a pair of C's. This shocked Rinpoche. At this time, Lin Shaola wasn't just a size larger. Her figure had also become more voluptuous, and her exquisite curves had become more attractive. Her face was even more seductive. After taking a closer look, Rinpoche saw something that shocked him even more. Tail. Rinpoche suddenly realized that there was a tail sticking out of Lin Shaola's skirt. It was a very short, gray, and fluffy tail. Brother-in-law, stop him. Even though Lin Shaola looked pretty good, Rinpoche still didn't dare to let her continue and hurriedly shouted. Oomph. Chi Zitting snorted. He tapped his crutches on the ground and swooped into the darkness like a huge eagle. At this moment, a figure pounced out of the darkness and collided with Chi Zitting in the air. Boom! The jade-waisted slaves around them were sent flying. Even the soil and stones on the ground were shaved off. Both of them were sent flying backward. Rinpoche had sharp eyes and saw that there was a snake's tail behind that figure. Ha ha! So powerful! Chi Zitting landed in the forest, laughed a few times, and swooped into the darkness again. At this time, Lin Xiaola also pounced toward them. Her speed was much faster than before, and Ren Baqian couldn't see her at all. The Empress's face was instantly covered with purplish-red veins as she charged toward Lin Xiaola. The two of them exchanged a few body positions in the air before stopping. There was almost no sound of collision. Ren Baqian looked over and saw a few patches of white and purple on the Empress's waist and abdomen. There was also a faint red seeping out. However, with a wipe of her hand, the wound disappeared, leaving only snow-white skin and purple veins. However, the red muslin on her body and the hole in her undergarments couldn't be wiped off. Ren Baqian took a deep breath. According to the description of the heavenly silkworm dragging beans, this was simply terrifying. The Empress was actually injured by Lin Xiaola in one move. Lin Xiaola was lying on the ground with 3 limbs on the ground. One of her hands was raised, and she kept flicking her nails, making a sizzling sound. Chapter 779. The Empress's face was ice cold, but her eyes were wide open. It was evident that she found it unbelievable that she had been injured by Lin Xiaola. In the next second, the two of them were entangled in the air at a speed that could not be seen clearly. There was almost no sound of collision between the two, but trees fell out of thin air. Marks kept appearing on the ground. Hee, how is it? Did I teach him well? The herdsman's voice came from the darkness again. What's that thing with a snake tail? Ren Baqian asked as he looked around. That's Lu Sheng. He has the bloodline of Snake Xiao. What do you think? It was a pity that she did not have much bloodline and her upper limit was too low. However, it's more than enough to deal with you. I would like to thank you for sending me this half-human with the blood of a chinchilla. The herdsman's laughter was ear-piercing. However, the current situation was indeed a little troublesome. Qi Ziding was entangled by Lu Sheng, and the Empress was entangled by Lin Xiaola. Furthermore, Lin Xiaola's strength had increased tremendously. The two of you, go and give that herdsman some trouble, Ren Baqian said to Ba Man and Xiong Yu, who were watching the scene anxiously. This place. The two hesitated. You guys won't be able to help either. Capture the ringleader first, Ren Baqian said as he looked at the scene. Although Ren Baqian let the two of them go, he didn't have high expectations. The two of them were much slower than the herder, not to mention the fact that the herder was obviously stronger than the previous two. Ren Baqian frowned as he pondered if there was any solution. At the same time, he rummaged through his bag to see if there was anything that could be used at this moment. He wondered if the large fireball spell would work. It probably wouldn't cause too much damage. Ren Baqian opened a bag and realized that it was filled with sweets. He rolled his eyes and had an idea. No matter what, he had to give it a try first. Look at my dove. Ren Baqian took 2 pieces of dove, opened the packaging, and threw them into the arena. Look at my gilly. Look at my Ferrero. Watch my Sufuji. Look at my golden monkey. Look at my white rabbit creations. Lin Xiaola instantly appeared in the air and caught the white rabbit creamy candy in her mouth. The Empress followed closely behind and struck her with her palm. Lin Xiaola dodged in midair. In the empty space where she was originally standing, the Empress created a hole with a radius of 3 meters. Seeing that it was effective, Ren Baqian was overjoyed. Sure enough, he had to use the white rabbit creamy candy to deal with Lin Xiaola. Look at my white rabbit creations. Lin Xiaola, damn. Big white rabbit. Damn. Big white rabbit. Damn. Bang. The Empress slapped Lin Xiaola, who was flying in the air, into the ground. The Empress, whose body was covered with purplish-red veins, landed and punched Lin Xiaola repeatedly. Ren Baqian could feel the ground shaking as if there was an earthquake. After a few punches, a large pit with a radius of more than 100 feet appeared on the ground. Ren Baqian lay at the edge of the pit and saw the Empress stand up from Lin Xiaola's body. The wrinkles on her face gradually faded away. He's not dead, right? Ren Baqian asked worriedly. He has fainted, the Empress said before disappearing into the pit. Impossible. How is this possible? Why are you here? How can you defeat a half-human with the blood of a chinchilla? A panic scream came from afar. Rin Baqian felt that it was much better than the bell-like laughter from before. You won't understand the world of a foodie. Rin Baqian looked relaxed. Rin Baqian jumped into the pit and looked at Lin Xiaola. Her face looked like a half-human after being beaten by the Empress, but her chest was heaving up and down. She had indeed fainted. There were also a few pieces of white rabbit creations stained with saliva in the soil beside her mouth. Rin Baqian wiped the soil off the white rabbit creations and stuffed them into her mouth. He stood up and looked at Lin Xiaola. She was about 155 meters tall before, but now she looked about the same height as the Empress. Her originally skinny figure was much more voluptuous, and her pair of C's were very conspicuous on her body. That delicate and pretty face. He couldn't look at it because she had already become a half-human. He then went to look for ropes to tie her up. After losing a pair of A's and picking up a pair of C's, Rin Baqian felt that he had made a profit this time. He was in good mood. He took off the leather clothes of a few winged cavalry warriors, cut them into strips with a knife, twisted them into ropes, and then hummed a tune while tying them up. Don't think that I didn't notice you sneaking out to meet her again. Don't ask me for my opinion. There's obviously something wrong with your eyes. This is my last warning. If you still don't know how to behave, get out of my sight with that vixen. Sir, what's a vixen? A few winged cavalry guards standing at the side asked. The fight was in full swing. A few winged cavalry warriors threw insecticide wherever they saw a lot of jade-wasted slaves and completely controlled the situation. That herdsman who abducted Lin Xiaola is a vixen, Rin Baqian said casually and conveniently changed the direction of Lin Xiaola's body. Don't expose yourself. This fellow actually wasn't wearing any underwear. After thinking about it, it didn't seem very good for her to be tied up without underwear. Rin Baqian tore a piece of cloth from his body and put it on her. He also conveniently studied how her tail grew and casually stroked it. They're called herdsmen, right? I understand. Today, you're also a vixen, right? Vixen is actually a relative term. One of the winged cavalry warriors suddenly said. Rin Baqian was stunned and blankly looked back at the winged cavalry warrior, who looked quite young. I didn't expect you to comprehend the theory of relativity. Rin Baqian was shocked. This was Dayo's Einstein. The theory of relativity was Einstein, right? Report to my school when we get back, Rin Baqian said. It's a waste for such a talent to be in the winged cavalry. Sir, I still think it's pretty good to be in the winged cavalry. The man smiled embarrassedly. Cut the crap. What's your name? Rin Baqian interrupted him. Su Fu. Rin Baqian looked at the winged cavalry warrior again and said, I'll inform Her Majesty later. Report to the school when you get back. You can't refuse. Sir, I can't read. The man's face immediately turned bitter. You can learn if you can't read. It's a gift to be able to comprehend the theory of relativity. Rin Baqian lowered his head and continued to tie her up. After a while, he finally finished tying her up. The surrounding winged cavalry warriors couldn't bear to watch. They shifted their gaze to the side and then secretly shifted their gaze back. It couldn't be helped because Lin Xiaola's current image was too attractive. Her figure could be said to be curvaceous, and now that she was tied up by Rin Baqian's tortoise shell, her alluring parts were all highlighted. It made people's mouths dry up. An hour later, the battle was coming to an end, and the Empress walked back with a cold face. Rin Baqian didn't need to ask to know that the herdsman had escaped just by looking at her face. However, the jade-wasted slaves were left here to obstruct everyone, and Lu Shang was also pestering cheese-eating. Even if the herdsman escaped, he wouldn't be able to cause any trouble for the time being. Did you tie her up? The Empress's face immediately turned black when she saw Lin Xiaola being tied up by Rin Baqian. Lin Xiaola is a little difficult to deal with now, so I used all the methods I could to restrict her movements. Who knew that she would end up like this? Rin Baqian looked at Lin Xiaola doubtfully, and then at his own hands as if he couldn't believe that he was the one who tied her up. Chapter 780. Lu Shang still managed to escape in the end. Rinpoche wanted to capture Lu Sheng since the herdsman wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. However, it wasn't easy to capture a herdsman with such strength. This was especially so in the middle of the night and in a completely unfamiliar forest. Qi Ziding chased for almost an hour and couldn't even see Lu Sheng's shadow before returning resentfully. At this point, all the jade-wasted slaves had been killed. "Count the casualties and report to me," the Empress ordered. Now that Gongzheng wasn't around, it wasn't as easy to command the winged cavalry as before, which made her feel inconvenient. In the end, more than 10 people died. There were more than 100 lightly injured. Fortunately, as long as they didn't lose an arm or a leg, these people wouldn't take it seriously. Furthermore, they were only able to achieve this result with the help of insecticide. It was evident that the jade-wasted slaves with the commander were indeed a threat. Even if they weren't strong individually, tens of thousands of them could still pose a great threat. Not long after, Lin Xiaola, who had been beaten into a half-beast by the Empress, woke up. She was tied up tightly by Rinpoche and couldn't exert any strength. Her nails were 3 inches long, but they couldn't touch any ropes. It had to be said that Rinpoche put a lot of effort into this tortoiseshell binding. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. Instead, some parts of her body became even tighter. Lin Xiaola. Rinpoche looked down at Lin Xiaola, who was constantly struggling on the ground. Her eyes were still vertical, and there was a hidden green glow in them. Her face was full of ferocity. White rabbit creamy candy. Rinpoche took out a piece of white rabbit creamy candy and threw it into her mouth. Lin Xiaola swallowed the white rabbit creamy candy and calmed down for a few minutes before struggling violently again. Rinpoche threw another piece of milk candy into her mouth, grabbed a handful, and stuffed it into the hands of the guard beside him. He told the guard to give Lin Xiaola a piece every few minutes before going to look for the Empress. Lin Xiaola hasn't recovered and seems to still be controlled by that herdsman. We have to catch him and find a solution. Rinpoche found the Empress leaning against a tree, sat down beside her, and held her hand. However, it wouldn't be easy to catch that herdsman, especially now that all his jade-wasted slaves were dead. It would be even harder to find him. The Empress muttered to herself, "How did you manage to keep those 2 heaven-grade weapons? Does Her Majesty mean to bring it back to Earth?" Rinpoche immediately reacted. The herdsman's control over Lin Xiaola can't compare to Tung Yu's control over his heaven-grade weapon, the Empress said. Just now, Rinpoche really didn't think of this point, but the Empress pointed it out in an instant. This was probably what it meant when one was closely involved in the situation. "I'll give it a try tomorrow," Rinpoche said. This method indeed had a high probability of success. As long as she got rid of the herder's control, Lin Xiaola would return to her original state. Then, everyone came to the tree with the face of justice. Looking at the tree, no one knew what to do. "Is he inside the tree?" Rinpoche asked doubtfully. Otherwise, why would the tree have the same face as him? However, the tree was only slightly thicker than a person's head. It couldn't fit a person at all. "Remove the tree layer by layer. I want to see what's inside," the Empress said coldly. Immediately, someone peeled the tree layer by layer from the bark to the inside, but there was no trace of justice. "Underground," Rinpoche reminded. Since he wasn't inside the tree, he must be underground. "Dig it all up," the Empress ordered. A moment later, everyone looked at the dug-up ground and felt a chill in their hearts. Sure enough, they saw justice. He was tightly entangled by the tree roots, and his skin was wrapped around his bones. He was no different from a dead person. The originally tall and strong man was now almost unrecognizable. If it weren't for the tattoo on his body and the missing finger, no one would be able to recognize him. Everyone could see that the tree roots weren't only entangling justice, but also piercing into his body, robbing him of everything he had, including his strength, blood, and even his soul. Everyone finally knew why there was a face on the tree trunk. This tree had actually absorbed everything about him. The Empress clenched her fists, and her face turned pale. She had never hated a person or a race so much in her life. Besides Justice's corpse, there were at least 7 or 8 skeletons tightly entangled by the tree roots. Most of them were aboriginals, and only 2 or 3 were from beasts. This was just one tree. It was unknown how many aboriginal souls were buried in this forest. This wasn't the only forest like this. At least, this was the 3rd forest that they had seen. They deserved to die. The Empress squeezed out these bone-chilling words from between her teeth. I will catch them and cut off their flesh inch by inch. Chi Zitting cursed loudly. Ba Man, Xiongyu, and the other aboriginals were also furious. The ones lying here were all aboriginals. Furthermore, they were being used as nutrients. Although they had heard that the jade-wasted slaves used the aboriginals as a breeding ground, they didn't expect this forest to be the same. How many aboriginals would be killed by these jade-wasted slaves in this forest? The Empress walked to Gong Zheng, raised her hand, and pressed it on his forehead. Gong Zheng immediately stopped breathing. Destroy this entire forest. The Empress said coldly before turning and walking in a certain direction. Ren Baqian hurriedly followed behind her. The two of them walked for more than 5 kilometers before the Empress stopped and stood there in silence. It was obvious that she was in a terrible mood. Ren Baqian didn't say anything. He found a place beside her to sit down and think about something. After a long time, the Empress let out a long sigh as if a gust of wind had blown up. With this sigh, the suffocating feeling in the Empress's heart was slightly alleviated. They deserve to die. They deserve to die. The Empress said hatefully. They do deserve to die, but I just thought of something, Ren Baqian said. Speak. The 3 herdsmen that we have seen so far have a forest like this around each of them. Furthermore, the jade-wasted slaves come to these forests at night. This kind of forest should be related to the jade-wasted slaves that the herdsmen graze, Ren Baqian said. The Empress nodded. According to Bohr, there are more than 30 herdsmen here, so there are more than 30 such forests. Each herdsman has at least a few thousand jade-wasted slaves, and some even have tens of thousands of them. Just these jade-wasted slaves alone require the lives of 300,000 people. Including these forests, I'm afraid that even 500,000 to 600,000 people wouldn't be able to stop them. With so many people disappearing, why didn't anyone discover this before? Why didn't anyone suspect anything? Chapter 781. Why didn't anyone notice that hundreds of thousands of people were missing? Where did these people come from? Why didn't the surrounding villages notice anything wrong? Without Ren Baqian's reminder, the Empress wouldn't have thought of this. However, with his reminder, she immediately realized the seriousness of this matter. What do you think? The Empress asked with a gloomy face. First of all, there are a few things that need to be clarified. Ren Baqian frowned as he pondered. First of all, how long do these herdsmen live? The jade-wasted slaves in the villages that we have passed through have been in human bodies for more than 10 years, but they still haven't completely turned into jade-wasted slaves. In other words, the cultivation of jade-wasted slaves takes at least 20 years. In that case, how long did it take for these herdsmen to cultivate the jade-wasted slaves in this forest? 500,000 to 600,000 people may seem like a lot, but if it is stretched to 100 years or even longer, the number of people going missing every year will decrease significantly. Even so, 50,000 to 60,000 people going missing every year isn't a small number. Secondly, these jade-wasted slaves are consumables and food. What is the rate of their consumption? The numbers mentioned above are calculated based on the current number of jade-wasted slaves. Taking into account the consumption of hundreds of years, the previously estimated number will be greatly increased. It could be up to 1 million or even 2 million people. At this point, the Empress's face turned extremely ugly. Ren Baqian's words suddenly made her feel that the aboriginals were livestock raised here, just like the fork-horned cattle and jumping goats that were raised outside the mountains. Thirdly, and most importantly, how many herdsmen are there? There are more than 30 of them in this group. According to Bohr, they will give up their childhood memories when they reach adulthood. In other words, they actually have a place to live. There must be some herdsmen living there to take care of the young. The others will leave when they reach adulthood and find a place to live alone. Where is that gathering place? What is the total number of herdsmen? What is their fertility and lifespan? Rinpoche's 3 questions made the Empress gloomy, and she remained silent. There were too many things that could be drawn from these 3 questions. Just the 30 herdsmen here alone had caused millions of aboriginals to die in their hands. If there were more herdsmen, but I don't think there are many herders. Rinpoche thought for a while and said, if there were hundreds of herdsmen, the death toll over the years would be 10 times higher. More than 10 million people is already close to the total population of the aboriginals. After all, the total population of the aboriginals was only slightly more than 10 million. Anything else? The Empress waited for a moment. Seeing that he didn't speak, she turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were shining brightly in the darkness. I have an idea. The aboriginals that the herdsmen targeted must have been at the edge of the strongholds. That way, they wouldn't be easily discovered. But with such a large number, it was impossible to hide it for so long. The only possibility was that the nearby stronghold was also under their control. A portion of the people in the strongholds were moved to this secret place and turned into jade-wasted slaves. The people in the other strongholds were left behind as a barrier. This way, even if their behavior was slightly inappropriate, the other strongholds would not think too much about it, even if they were suspicious. Compared to disappearing directly, this method was much harder to detect. Every once in a while, this barrier would slowly move inward. Rinpoche drew a circle on the ground and then another circle on the edge of the garden. By moving inward bit by bit, they're nibbling away at the aboriginals. The Empress felt her hair stand on end when she heard this, and all her hair stood on end. However, the most dangerous thing about these herdsmen is that they have always been secretive and unknown. Now that we know about them, it will be much easier to deal with them. They aren't strong, and we have already killed 3 herdsmen, let alone the aboriginals. They might have been discovered by experts before. Rinpoche comforted her. Then, he looked a little strange and said, however, I'm afraid that those experts have failed at telling them their names. Just thinking about it, with the temperament of the aboriginals, they would probably fall for the herdsman's tricks if they were asked for their names. After a long time, the Empress heaved a sigh of relief, looked at Rinpoche, and said, you are quite smart. Definitely. There's no need to doubt me. Rinpoche gave her a thumbs up and revealed his white teeth. However, his white teeth weren't so conspicuous under his glowing skin. The Empress stood up and said, let's go back. I can't run anymore. Please carry me. Rinpoche opened his arms. Puffed. Rinpoche was held by the neck by the Empress and carried back. Brother, come here for a while. The Empress called Chi Zitting aside and told him what had happened. Chi Zitting's expression changed drastically after hearing this. Is that really the case? It's just a guess, but the possibility is very high. Didn't you see an abandoned village before? Rinpoche asked. Chi Zitting's face was gloomy as he swung his cane at the tree next to him, sending the upper half of the tree flying. After breaking 7 or 8 trees in a row, Chi Zitting vented his anger and slowly calmed down. Yes, it's indeed possible. Chi Zitting said, Xiaoya, what are you going to do? You know the 60,000 mountains better than I do. Find some people to check if there are any problems with the surrounding villages. If there are any problems, report them immediately and kill them once they are confirmed, the Empress said coldly. If we check all the villages on the periphery, I'm afraid it won't be completed in a year, Chi Zitting said. After all, it wasn't easy to transmit information in the 60,000 mountains, and the deeper one went, the more difficult it was. No matter how long it takes, these foreign races must die, the Empress said coldly. What about your marriage? Chi Zitting asked with a frown. The Empress was silent for a while. Rinpoche then said, it's more important. Thank you for your concern, brother-in-law. Puffed. Chi Zitting spat. In any case, it seemed that his marriage with the Empress would have to be delayed for some time. Although this matter is important, you don't have to stay here all the time. There are still many cardinal heaven experts in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, and I have seen more than 30 of them. As long as we gather these people together, we can easily kill these foreign races. Furthermore, Dayo doesn't only have the 60,000 mountains. The previous emperor and countless ancestors fought for the outside world with their blood. There are also Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chun nation eyeing us covetously. The Yun nation has died, Rin Baqian suddenly said. What? Qi Ziding was stunned. The Yun nation has died and is no more. The emperor of the Yun nation is a guest in Lan City. In the future, you can call it the Yun province or the Yun protectorate. Rin Baqian laughed. When did this happen? Why didn't I know about it? Qi Ziding was stunned. The Yun nation had fallen? It had only been a few years, and such a big thing had happened outside. It has been a few months, and Great Xia isn't far from falling, Rin Baqian said. Great Xia had also been in trouble recently. Previously, Xia Bailong was killed by the stench, and the royal family of Great Xia moved out of the palace 3 months later. After that, the security was naturally very tight. It took a long time for the second batch of stink bombs that Rin Baqian sent over to find a way to get into the palace. Then, it exploded 2 months ago. This time, someone died again. It was the Empress Dowager. Ever since Xia Baichong's death, her condition hadn't been very good. It had only been half a year since she returned to the palace, and the second batch of stink bombs exploded. Her body was already in poor condition, and she smelled this familiar formula and smell. She fainted on the spot and died the next day. 2 consecutive stink bombs were detonated in the palace. The first time, the previous emperor died, and the second time, the Empress Dowager died. This caused Great Xia, which boasted that it was the most powerful country in the world, to be slapped in the face and pushed into the cesspool. Everyone felt as if they could smell the stench that lingered in their bones. The emperor of Great Xia issued 7 orders to the border guards in a row, urging them to speed up the attack. The royal family and the court wanted to see the news of victory in half a month. Half a month later, the empress received the news. Hong Wu and Zidong Lai sent 20,000 reinforcements, defeating the 400,000-strong Great Xia army in one fell swoop. They also seized Tiesoa Pass and 3 other border guards. After seizing the 3 border guards, Hong Wu sent troops into Great Xia's territory to plunder more than 30 cities before returning with a full load. At present, Dao had no intention of conquering Great Xia. Conquering the Yun nation was their top priority. After seizing these 3 border guards, Great Xia's doors were wide open. A few days after the Empress received the news, the entire Great Xia court was in mourning. Then, taxes were raised and soldiers were conscripted again. However, at this time, there was news that made things worse. Chapter 782. In an official yamen in Qingzhou. At this moment, it was occupied by a group of elite soldiers in green cotton armor. The heads of the officials who were originally in the yamen were hung in a row outside the yamen. The dark red ice on the ground was slowly melting under the sun. Su Qing, who was wearing a thin shirt, walked out of the room. The cold wind outside immediately woke him up. After breakfast, Su Qing casually asked the guard, "Is Qing Lian still in the room?" "Yes. She hasn't come out for the past 2 days." Su Qing frowned. Dingzhou, Qingzhou, and Pingzhou had all revolted according to the plan. Although Great Xia was at its weakest, its hundreds of years of rule was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Although he had planned for many years, most of the revolutionary soldiers were just ordinary people who couldn't survive. There were less than 10,000 elites. At this time, he had to be careful and handle many things. However, after Qing Lian returned from Dao, she didn't share the burden. Instead, she plunged into the room and did this for a month. Every day, she would hold those books that people couldn't understand and write and draw. Su Qing felt that Qing Lian seemed to have changed into a different person after going out. Or did something happen to her over there? Su Qing stood in place and pondered for a while before deciding to talk to her. After all, Qing Lian was a great help in terms of wisdom and tactics. Furthermore, her lifespan was shorter than that of ordinary practitioners. Furthermore, she was a woman and wouldn't pose too much of a threat to him. Su Qing came to the door of Qing Lian's room and knocked. There was no response. However, He heard the sound of something colliding inside. Qing Lian. Su Qing raised his voice and shouted, "Come in." A melodious female voice came from the room. Su Qing pushed the door open and saw Qing Lian sitting in front of the table with disheveled hair and a dirty face. She threw a needle on the table and wrote something on a piece of paper. Then, she picked up the needle and threw it again. Su Qing felt that she was simply crazy. He had never seen her in such a disheveled state before, but now she was sitting here with disheveled hair and a dirty face. Her eyes were bloodshot when she occasionally turned her head. He reckoned that she hadn't rested since yesterday. "What are you doing?" Su Qing walked forward and found a piece of paper on Qing Lian's table. There were horizontal lines drawn on it. Qing Lian was holding a needle and repeatedly throwing it on the paper. "I'm verifying a question. The distance between these threads is 2 inches, and this needle is 1.5 inches long. If I throw this needle down, what are the chances of it hitting one of the threads?" Qing Lian's hands did not stop moving as she spoke. Not long after, she exclaimed in admiration, "I've tried more than 3,000 times, and it's just as the book says. It's really amazing." Su Qing said solemnly, "I have something to discuss with you." "Wait, I'll finish the rest first," Qing Lian said without raising her head. After a long while, Qing Lian finally put down her pen and stretched her body. She leaned against the back of the chair and said lazily, "What's the matter? What are you doing every day now?" Su Qing stood a little further away and asked, "You wouldn't understand even if I told you." Qing Lian said lazily and yawned. Su Qing's frown deepened. In fact, he had mentioned it once before, but Qing Lian had said the same thing, which made him quite dissatisfied. "Now that big things are starting to happen, you have been looking at these things every day since you came back from Dayo. You don't care about anything else. Qing Lian, don't forget our agreement." Su Qing pointed at the things on the table with an ugly expression. Qing Lian looked up at him and said, "Oh, you think what I'm doing now is useless, right?" "That's right," Su Qing said while suppressing his anger. Qing Lian stood up from the chair, walked to the window, and waved her hand. A cold light flashed, and a sword appeared in her hand. She turned to look at Su Qing and said, "I know you have a trick called Rain Gate. Use it on me and see if I can block it. My back is facing you." "Are you crazy?" Su Qing asked with a livid face. "Why don't you try and see if I'm crazy? Don't you want to know what I'm doing every day?" Qing Lian's eyes curved like a crescent moon, and her face was full of smiles. Seeing the smile on Qing Lian's face, Su Qing became even angrier. "You are a sword slave, and your cultivation comes from the sword in your hand. You don't have any abilities, so what right do you have to look down on me?" "Wait," Qing Lian suddenly shouted. "Let's go out and try. It would be a pity if you break anything." Su Qing was even angrier, but he endured it and said, "Fine." He made up his mind. Although he wasn't as strong as Qing Lian, if she wanted to block this move with her back facing him, he would definitely teach her a lesson. The two of them left the house, and Qing Lian stood in the middle of the courtyard, holding the sword with her back facing Su Qing, and said, "Make your move. Be careful," Su Qing warned. Rain Gate was one of the 3 killer moves of Su Qing's sect. As the name suggested, it was like opening the heavenly gate of rain. Su Qing didn't carry any weapons, but his hands suddenly emitted thousands of silver lights, which fell on Qing Lian like a downpour. Even an ant would have no place to hide under such heavy rain, let alone a human. However, Qing Lian held the sword in her right hand and drew a line in the air, and the sound of pearls and jade falling on a plate rang out. Su Qing looked at Qing Lian, who didn't move at all, and his face turned pale with shock in his eyes. "Impossible! How did you do it?" Rain Gate was one of the 3 killer moves of his sect. Over the years, countless experts have been targeted by this move. So how could Qing Lian block all of it with her back facing him? Qing Lian put away her sword. Her chest rose and fell slightly, and there was some sweat on her head, but she looked very proud. "I calculated it. This method of algebra is really amazing. Your rain gate looks like it's going straight down, but there's actually a sequence and a certain pattern in it. As long as I can calculate the probability of your attack, I'll be able to block this move. Su Qing was dumbfounded. Of course, it's easy to say, but it's actually very troublesome to calculate. I have to calculate the angle of each move and the landing point of each move. I have a deep understanding of you, and I've tried to calculate this move of yours before, so I was able to calculate it. If someone else had used this move, I wouldn't have been able to calculate it in such a short time. Qing Lian softened her voice, or rather, she was comforting Su Qing. Otherwise, that old fellow and his sect would definitely think of a way to kill him. Su Qing's face alternated between green and white. He was indeed frightened. It was simply too terrifying. She actually blocked all of his moves with her back facing him. As for what Qing Lian said after that, he was skeptical. After a long while, Su Qing let out a long sigh. Even so, the most important thing now is the uprising. My ancestors have been planning for many years, and you and I have been preparing for this for many years, not to mention those who have bet their lives on this matter. Don't you know what's more important? Qing Lian's eyes turned, and she immediately beamed with joy. This matter is easy to handle. Send all the information to my room, and I'll give you an answer in 3 days. 3 days later, Su Qing received a whole stack of papers that were filled with data. From the time of the imperial court's recruitment, the number of people, the calculation of rations, the reaction time of the imperial court, the general sent out, and the responses of the various regions, everything was marked with percentages. Even which route, how many troops to attack, how long it would take, and the probability of success were all marked with percentages. After Su Qing finished reading the stack of papers, his mind was filled with 3 words. How is this possible? How did she manage to do it? How real are these things? At this moment, Qing Lian was in a deep sleep in her room, and there was a hint of exhaustion on her face. She was still tightly holding a book called Probability Theory and Mathematical Statistics in her hand. Chapter 783. Ren Baqian carried Lin Xiaola, cautiously found a deserted place, and returned to Earth. Before he disappeared, he saw a touch of red appear in his line of sight. Ren Baqian finally left with a cheerful smile. He had finally escaped from that guy again. He didn't know why traveling between the 2 worlds had attracted the Beachy so much. It had been circling around him for so long. Moreover, it appeared every time. This made Ren Baqian wonder if it could predict the future. Or perhaps it was some kind of beast intuition. One had to know that he could only travel within 2 to 7 days. It didn't take more than a second. It was really surprising that it would appear every time. Fortunately, it was greatly affected after entering the 60,000 mountains. Ren Baqian had about a 50% chance of getting rid of it and a 50% chance of it catching up. After returning to Earth with a happy smile, Ren Baqian threw Lin Xiaola to the ground and carefully stared at her pupils. He saw that the touch of green in her pupils was shrinking and collapsing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as if there was a black hole in her pupils that sucked in the touch of green. Lin Xiaola's eyes were momentarily confused as they drifted around without any focus. Then, her eyes gradually focused on Ren Baqian. She wanted to sit up but found that she was tightly tied up, especially when the rope passed between her legs. The friction made her whole body itch. Pink goosebumps rose all over her body, and her tail swept the ground like a broom. Who tied me up? Why did they tie me up? Lin Xiaola widened her eyes and looked puzzled. You're awake? Ren Baqian sat on the bed, looked at her, and asked casually. It seemed like a dream. Lin Xiaola was a little puzzled. What did you dream about? Ren Baqian asked with interest. Lin Xiaola recalled for a long time and said, I dreamed of a lot of food. Sure enough, Ren Baqian was speechless as he rubbed his chin. Originally, he still had some stubble, but now that he had achieved some small success in practicing the martial arts, there wasn't a single strand of hair on his body. Furthermore, he was very slippery. Who helped me? Why did you tie me up? Lin Xiaola asked with her eyes wide open. It's good that you're awake. Ren Baqian got up and found a blade to cut the rope. Lin Xiaola immediately broke free from the remaining rope and sat up. The short gray tail was still rubbing against the ground. As she moved, the piece of cloth that Ren Baqian used to cushion her fell off. How How did it get bigger? Lin Xiaola rubbed her chest, looking very confused. Why is there a tail? There seems to be a tail in the dream, too. Ren Baqian saw that she was at a loss and knew that she wouldn't know anything more. Furthermore, she looked dirty, so he simply said, "Take a shower first." Lin Xiaola took off her clothes as she walked into the bathroom. She was naked before she even entered the bathroom. Originally, she looked like she was 17 or 18 years old, but now she was all curves and curves. Her entire body was exquisite, and anyone who glanced at her would start to burn with anger. He lay on the bed and listened to the sound of running water coming from the bathroom. Not long after, Lin Xiaola came out of the bathroom. She had a special technique for dehydration. His body spun on the ground like a spinning top. He couldn't see anything at all. The water splashed all over the room. Ren Baqian's head and face were splashed, and the only impression he had was a pink trail in the air. It couldn't be helped. The human, I would always see objects that protruded from a flat surface first, especially when the object was still shaking. Put on. Ren Baqian threw a t-shirt and his sportswear to Lin Xiaola, took out his phone, and went downstairs. Just now, he had heard sounds from upstairs. Those guys were drinking again. When he went downstairs, Ren Wanyin and the 6-winged cavalry warriors were drinking. In the blink of an eye, a few years had passed. It was now late autumn on Earth in 2025, and Ren Wanyin had been friends with these winged cavalry warriors for a few years. In particular, Ren Wanyin and Ding Jie frequently brought the winged cavalry warriors to Wuji City, which was under construction. After a few years, Ren Wanyin and Ding Jie looked much more valiant, and the winged cavalry warriors had also changed a lot. Brother, Lady Boss. Everyone stood up when they saw Ren Baqian coming down. Ren Baqian sized up Ren Wanyin. After not seeing him for half a year, he had grown a mustache and looked a little older than him. Brother, why are you bald? What's on your body? Ren Wanyin was puzzled. He had just returned from staying in Wuji City for half a year, and he had just discovered that his brother was not only bald, but also shiny. His body shone with a metallic luster. Ren Baqian felt a toothache when he heard this. This was touching a sore spot. Take a seat. How's the situation over there? Ren Baqian asked. Although he would hear about the situation over there every time he came back, it wasn't as good as hearing it from Ren Wanyin, who had just returned. Look at the real thing. Ren Wanyin took out 2 boxes, one big and one small, and asked someone to fill the bigger box with water. He then connected the 2 boxes together and pressed them a few times. The bigger box began to emit white mist. Then, using the mist as a screen, images began to appear in the air. Turn off the lights. Ren Wanyin called out. He then smiled at Ren Baqian and said, "This fog projector is the latest model. It's much more stable than the previous one, but it still looks better in the dark." Ren Baqian had seen this kind of equipment before, but he didn't pay much attention to it. At this moment, he was focused on looking at the images that appeared in the mist and listening to Ren Wanyin's explanation. At this time, the construction of the 50 square kilometers in the center of Wuji City was almost complete. All that was left was some supporting greening and living facilities. It was estimated that this part would be completed in half a year. The rest would have to be continued after that. Furthermore, the first batch of citizens had already started to move in. This group of citizens were the batches of soldiers who had been selected to practice martial arts, the martial arts experts who had been recruited, and their families. After 6 years of selection and training, there were a total of about 50,000 people. Among them, there were about 5,000 man-wheel experts. In terms of numbers alone, this was an extremely high proportion. However, these 50,000 people were carefully selected. Every one of them was talented and above average. Most of them used to be special forces or elite soldiers. After looking at the situation in various parts of the city, Ren Wanyin turned the image to one of the buildings and said, "This is our building. It covers an area of 160,000 square meters. The bottom 5 floors are shopping malls, the 6th to 8th floors are martial arts centers, the 9th and 10th floors are entertainment centers, the 11th to 14th floors are restaurants, bars, and accommodation areas, and the 15th to 17th floors are private areas. Your villa is on the 18th floor, which is a sky garden. However, this building doesn't have a name yet. Let's call it Chirin Restaurant, Rin Baqian said casually. Whatever you say. Rin Wanyan wrote down the name and smiled. Hey, I'm hungry. A lady appeared in the living room and said in a sweet voice. Rin Wanyan turned his head abruptly, and his heart skipped a beat. He saw an extremely delicate lady exuding a seductive and wild aura from head to toe. There was also a hint of innocence between her eyebrows. This lady was talking to Rin Baqian. She's simply a demoness. Rin Wanyan suddenly had this thought. This lady might not be the most beautiful in the world, but she exuded a seductive and wild aura. Coupled with the innocence and tenderness between her eyebrows, it was impossible to find a second person in the world who gave off these two feelings at the same time. This woman was truly capable of seducing one's soul. She wasn't much worse than his sister-in-law. More importantly, she was wearing Ren Baqian's t-shirt and sportswear, revealing her long legs. This made it hard for people not to fantasize. The 6 winged cavalry warriors looked at the lady and then at Rin Baqian. Their expressions changed drastically and they asked, "Who are you?" "None of your business." Lin Xiaola, who wasn't familiar with these winged cavalry warriors, replied sweetly. Rin Wanyan's heart skipped a beat. "Oh no, how dare you snatch the lady boss from the boss? Kill." The few of them were furious and started to attack. Chapter 784. It's a misunderstanding. Don't hurt them. Rin Baqian didn't move at all and only shouted softly. The winged cavalry warriors jumped up quickly and were pressed down quickly. The others didn't see anything clearly. They only heard a few banging sounds as Lin Xiaola pressed the faces of the winged cavalry warriors to the ground. Lin Xiaola simply pressed their heads to the ground and let go with a relaxed look on her face. "This is Librarian Lin. All of you have seen her before," Rin Baqian said. The winged cavalry warriors stood up from the ground while covering their noses. They looked at Lin Xiaola in shock and asked, "How did she grow so big in just a few years?" Lin Xiaola had no impression of these winged cavalry warriors because she only knew how to eat and sleep. However, most of them knew her. "Get the cook to prepare some food for her. Make more. I'm a little hungry too," Rin Baqian instructed the winged cavalry warriors. Nowadays, these winged cavalry warriors were pretty good at playing with their phones. Although they didn't know how to type, they knew how to play games on their phones. "Sit still for a while." Rin Baqian pointed to the sofa beside him. Lin Xiaola sat there quietly and didn't look as fierce as before. In less than 3 minutes, Rin Baqian saw her eyelids begin to droop. She curled up on the sofa and fell asleep immediately. Rin Wanyan glanced at the tail that was sticking out from under Lin Xiaola's clothes and couldn't take his eyes off it. Was this woman playing some unspeakable game with his brother upstairs? Why did this tail feel like some kind of stopper? "Continue." Rin Baqian gestured to Rin Wanyan to wake him up from his daydreaming. Rin Wanyan then continued to explain to him. Rin Baqian had previously obtained 5 square kilometers of land in Wuji City. Except for 3% of the land, which was used to build this building, the rest of the land was used to build a commercial pedestrian street, a large martial arts arena that could accommodate 30,000 people, a small hospital, 8 commercial buildings, and a large residential area. The residential area covered an area of 1 million square meters and had a total of 36-story buildings. Each building had 2 stairs and 4 households, which could accommodate a total of 720 households. The buildings only occupied 17% of the residential area. There was a small martial arts arena in front of each building. There were also 4 large martial arts arenas and a square in the residential area. Rin Baqian was preparing to use this place as a military camp. These buildings covered an area of 2 million square meters. What was left was a park that covered an area of 2 million square meters. "Well done," Rin Baqian praised after reading all the information. "Brother, you don't know how much Ding Jie and I have been on tenterhooks these days. We were afraid that something might go wrong," Rin Wanyan said as he leaned back. At that time, he had just graduated from university and Ding Jie was still a university student. It was terrifying that the two of them had to be responsible for such an important matter. Thanks to Lin Feng. If it wasn't for her, the two of us would have been caught unprepared. Ren Wanyan shook his head. When he thought about the fear and helplessness he felt when he first took over this matter, his heart still palpitated slightly. There are also many people who have helped a lot, from the designers to the supervisors to the material procurement. Ren Baqian laughed heartily. Don't make it sound so scary. In fact, most of the work is done by professionals. The two of you are only responsible for some liaison work and making decisions when I'm not around. That being said, the supervision of such a large area of construction and the flow of tens of billions of dollars was very stressful for these two young people. Even though the two of them had a group of professionals under them, and even with the help of the country, other people would have collapsed long ago. Ren Wanyan then placed 5 pieces of paper on the table. Ren Baqian glanced at them and saw that they were the resumes of 5 people. If you remember correctly, these 5 people were currently recruited in the past few years. Currently, they were in charge of a company in Wuji City under Ren Baqian. Why? Is there a problem? These 4 people are corrupt. The least corrupt one among them is 2 million yuan. The most daring one is this one who accepted 17 million yuan. As for this one, I'm afraid he's a spy. Ren Wanyan's expression wasn't good. After all, these 5 people were recruited by the 2 of them and were in charge of the company these days. There were a total of 7 people in charge, and 5 of them were problematic. This wasn't just because they were daring, but also because the 2 of them weren't able to suppress them. That was why they were so daring. Oh, they're quite daring. Ren Baqian laughed. He didn't take this kind of thing to heart. We are law-abiding citizens. This kind of thing can be reported to the police. Let the police handle these 4 people. I don't think anyone will dare to be careless about this matter. As for this, leave it to the Messier 87 department. They are professionals. Is there any noteworthy news recently? There's one more thing. The country has set up a department called the Sports Education Department. There is already clear news that the 15th set of Health Qigong will be promoted in primary and secondary schools throughout the country and in society early next year. Ren Baqian's relaxed expression froze for a moment before he leisurely said, "It's finally going to start." The name of the department was very low. However, the significance was extremely great. The great era was finally coming. No one knew what kind of storm it would stir up. If it was fast, it would take a year. If it was slow, it would take 3 to 5 years. This world was bound to change. It seemed that the country had already made preparations. After that, Ren Baqian learned about the situation of the martial arts centers. Currently, there were 3 centers with a total of more than 4,000 students. Among them, there were more than 200 elite students who had reached the man-will level. Among them, the strongest one had already reached the intermediate man-will level. His talent was quite outstanding and wasn't inferior to the experts nurtured by the country. These people were the seeds of the future. Early the next morning, everyone in the villa heard a woman scream from the 2nd floor. Ren Baqian went to the room full of snacks with a toothbrush in his mouth. Lin Shaola entered this room yesterday and didn't come out the entire night. However, she wasn't as excited as she was last night. Instead, she placed her hands on her chest and looked sluggish. "It's gone. Lin Shaola panicked when she saw Ren Baqian coming over. Ren Baqian focused his gaze and saw that Lin Shaola's seductive face had returned to its original delicate and pretty appearance. The pair of C's had also shrunk to a pair of A. She had become shorter. She had returned to her original appearance. Ren Baqian touched his chin. She had actually recovered? He didn't know if it had something to do with the jade-waisted slaves that she ate or the herdsmen. However, no matter what, she was considered to have completely broken away from the influence of the herdsmen. This should be a good thing, right? What should I do? Look, it's gone. Lin Shaola panicked. It looks like it has shrunk. There will be a chance for it to grow back in the future. Ren Baqian comforted her. Lin Shaola's delicate face twitched when she heard this, and it looked like she was about to cry. Chapter 785. When they saw Lin Xiaola again, the winged cavalry warriors were obviously much more friendly. So it's librarian Lin. Although Rinpochian had mentioned her before, everyone still felt that she looked more familiar when they saw her pair of A's. After all, the sight of her dozing off and drooling while tied to the mount had long been deeply engraved in their hearts. The only doubt was why she had shrunk back overnight, both her figure and appearance. Since Lin Xiaola was in so much pain because she had shrunk her pair of A's, Rinpochian treated her to a big meal. They booked a dessert shop. In fact, there was no need to turn her grief into food. After seeing the desserts, Lin Xiaola hesitated for 3 seconds and put aside her pair of A's. After finishing the dessert shop, Lin Xiaola got into the car and looked like she was about to cry again. "What should I do? There's nothing left." Rinpochian looked at her and asked, "Do you want to eat another dessert shop?" After he finished speaking, Lin Xiaola immediately looked away and said, "I just feel sorry for you. Let me tell you, I used this trick when I was 5 years old." Rinpochian grinned. When he was 4 or 5 years old, his father forgot him in kindergarten. All the other children had been picked up, and he was the only one left crying. It was a military kindergarten, and the soldiers in the kitchen gave him a nangwa pear when they saw how badly he was crying. After eating it, he felt that it was delicious and wanted more. The child didn't know what else to do and continued to cry. He cried until his father came to pick him up with a claw mark on his forehead, but he didn't get another one. This incident had always been a deep regret for him. When he saw Lin Xiaola, he was reminded of himself in the past. This trick was exactly the same as what he used in the past. After staying on Earth for 2 days, he prepared a large number of white rabbit creamy candies for Lin Xiaola and instructed the winged cavalry warriors to keep an eye on her before returning to Dayo. Lin Xiaola had already been tricked once. If she met that herdsman again, it would be troublesome. After that herdsman ran away, he might meet up with other herdsmen, so he might as well leave her on Earth. Of course, asking the winged cavalry to keep an eye on her was just a casual instruction. In fact, with a place to sleep and white rabbit creamy candies to eat, Rinpochian estimated that Lin Xiaola might still be there in 100 years as long as there wasn't the end of the world. When Rinpochian returned to Dayo, the forest had already been cleaned up. All the trees were piled together and burned to ashes along with the corpses that were dug out. Seeing that Rinpochian had returned, the Empress looked behind him and didn't see Lin Xiaola. "What about her?" "I'm staying on Earth." Rinpochian explained the reason to the Empress. She changed back to her original form. Looks like her evolution had a time limit. I think it might have something to do with the jade-waisted slave she ate. At the mention of the jade-waisted slaves, the Empress's face turned ugly. Every jade-waisted slave was a human life. What was the difference between eating them and eating humans? Furthermore, they were her people. However, she would not blame Lin Xiao for this. The fire had burned down half of the place. Some people were left behind to guard the place, while the others moved on to the next target. 3 days later, the Empress issued an order for Shi Wanya, the Protector General of the South, to immediately set off for the 60,000 mountains to coordinate the investigation of the situation in the stronghold. She also transferred more than 10 people from the Ministry of Revenue and prepared to use 2 years to record the situation of the strongholds in the 60,000 mountains. After this was done, she would establish a household registration management system. In the future, all the establishment and relocation of the strongholds would have to be recorded to prevent a situation like this from happening again. Millions of people had disappeared without anyone knowing. Another plan was to establish 2 new protectorates. One would be the Yun Protectorate, and the other would be the Protectorate of the South. The first was naturally to rule the Yun nation, and the second was to be in charge of the 60,000 mountains. In the past, she had always thought that the dangers in the mountains were natural disasters and beasts. After this incident, she realized that there were other enemies in the mountains. 2 days later, everyone was approaching the next target. The sound of a night cat could be heard in front of the group. The sound was long at first and then became short. After half an hour, a winged cavalry warrior came to report, "Your Majesty, the person who is scouting here previously hasn't appeared. Search. The Empress frowned. This wasn't a good sign. After searching for an entire afternoon, they found a strange forest more than 5 kilometers away. However, they couldn't find any traces of the person who was monitoring the area. This meant that this winged cavalry warrior had probably fallen into the hands of the other party. When night fell, another discovery gave everyone a bad premonition. The jade-waisted slaves didn't appear in the strange forest. Your Majesty, I reckon that the herdsmen here have already received the news and left, Renbachian said. The Empress was silent for a long time before looking up at Chi Ziding and saying, Brother, bring some people and wait here for another day. I'll go to another place. If the jade-waisted slaves don't appear by tomorrow, destroy this forest, the Empress added. Considering that every herdsman had such a forest and that jade-waisted slaves would appear in it every day, everyone suspected that this forest might be their food or a necessity for their survival. Although they didn't know the truth, they knew that there must be a reason for its existence, and that it was extremely important to both the herdsmen and the jade-waisted slaves. Understood. Chi Ziding nodded. You should be careful. You are the Empress. Others can encounter danger, but not you. That night, the Empress and Renbachian led 600 people to the next location. A week later, when they climbed over a mountain peak, Renbachian suddenly felt that the sky ahead had cleared up. The vibrant colors, bird song, and fragrance of flowers had returned, as if the sky had cleared up after the rain. Wait a minute. Renbachian stood on the back of the Crow General and looked down the mountain. It was gloomy everywhere, as if there was a lack of color. Looking ahead, it was a scene full of vitality. We are finally out. Renbachian laughed. I can't even feel good in that horrible place. The rest of the people also looked relieved. After staying in such a gloomy place for so long, even their hearts were shrouded in a haze. Continue forward, the Empress ordered, and everyone rode their mounts down the mountain. Bang! Bang! As soon as they reached the foot of the mountain, they suddenly felt the ground shake. A series of collisions could be heard in the forest ahead, and the trees in the distance began to fall. Be alert, someone in front immediately shouted. As the trees fell, a huge creature rushed out of the forest. It was a 7-meter-tall beast with 3 horns on its head that looked like a rhinoceros. Renbachian felt that this creature was more like a dinosaur than a rhinoceros. After rushing out of the forest for more than 200 meters, the beast turned around and roared at the forest. Following which, an even bigger creature appeared. A silverback gorilla that was more than 10 meters tall pulled out a tree from the edge of the forest that required 2 people to hug and threw it at the rhinoceros. TSK. King Kong. Renbachian gasped. He didn't expect to encounter such a battle between beasts as soon as he left the mountain. However, the battle ended very quickly. The 2 dire beasts did not fight to the death when there were people around. The rhinoceros ran away first, and the silverback gorilla did not chase after it. Instead, it roared a few times at the crowd and punched the ground a few times with its water tank-sized fists. Almost every punch created a pit in the ground. After intimidating the rhinoceros, the gorilla returned to the forest. Your Majesty, how strong are these 2 beasts? Renbachian pondered for a while and asked. Given the power of the gorilla, he reckoned that his yang boosting technique wouldn't work on it. The Empress wasn't too surprised and replied faintly, roughly equivalent to a beginner Cardinal Heaven expert. She then called a winged cavalry warrior over and asked, Where are they? Your Majesty, in a valley about a day's journey away. Chapter 786. On the way to their destination, the Roaring Emperor was excited to leave that lifeless place. It dug holes along the way and roared at the sky from time to time. Its small body emitted a beast-like roar that sounded like thunder on the ground. The sound waves caused the leaves to dance in the air and the birds and beasts in the surrounding forest to tremble. Several different roars could be heard in the distance as if they were warning them. It was obvious that they were Cardinal Heaven-level beasts who regarded the Roaring Emperor as an equal. When the team stopped to rest, Ren Baqian grabbed the roaring emperor by the nape of its neck and flicked its balls. He suddenly remembered something and asked, "Are we deep in the 60,000 mountains?" They were 1.5 months away from the family village. Although they were in the mountains, everyone had mounts and traveled very quickly. They traveled more than 60 kilometers a day, which meant that they were close to 3,000 kilometers in 1.5 months. In China, the distance from the capital to Shanghai was only about 2,400 kilometers. It should be the depths. The depths of the 60,000 mountains is just a term. Generally, the area that is half a month away from the outside world is called the periphery, and the area that is half a month to 2 months away is called the middle area. The rest is classified as the depths of the 60,000 mountains. The Empress saw that Ren Baqian was reaching out to hold her hand after flicking the balls of the roaring emperor. She immediately swept his wrist with 4 fingers, causing him to spin a few times like a top. "Don't touch me with that hand." The Empress looked disgusted. He casually threw the roaring emperor aside. The roaring emperor sat on the ground, stared blankly at its balls, and then roared at the sky. Halfway through its roar, it was stomped into the ground by the crow general. When it lifted its foot, there was only a hole left in the ground. A hole suddenly appeared in the ground a dozen meters away, and the roaring emperor poked its head out to roar again. The crow general was annoyed at how noisy this guy was and stomped on again. The roaring emperor poked its head out from 5 to 6 meters away. Before long, there were more than a dozen holes in the ground. Ren Baqian watched the 2 guys play whack-a-mole while asking the Empress, "Are there cardinal heaven experts and kismet heaven experts in the depths of the mountains?" Along the way, there were at least 4 cardinal heaven-level beasts that were alarmed by the roaring emperor. This was less than a day's journey. Even in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, there are very few cardinal heaven experts. However, the number of cardinal heaven-level beasts here is indeed higher. This place was desolate and uninhabited. Although there were more cardinal heaven-level beasts, it wasn't too surprising. In fact, the majority of the 60,000 mountains had not been explored. The Aboriginals only occupied a small area, and even for cardinal heaven experts, it was full to the bee. As such, no matter what they saw, it would be. The group arrived to the afternoon to the next day, too. "Your Majesty, this is the place," said the winged cavalry warrior who was leading the way. "Those fellows always like to find such lifeless places," the Empress said as she stood in front of the valley and took a look. Valley to be. To the valley. To. There were not many trees in the valley, and there were jagged rocks everywhere. In the depths of the valley, there was a pool, and around the pool was a large forest that was baring its fangs. At night, the group stood guard outside the valley, waiting for the jade-wasted slaves to appear. At night, they waited outside the valley for the jade-wasted slaves to appear. They waited until the 2 moons crossed in the sky, but there was still no sign of them. "It seems that the herdsmen have left," Ren Baqian said calmly as he and the Empress sat side by side on a rock. They missed, but it wasn't surprising. In fact, they had already been mentally prepared for this along the way. Although the herdsmen were solitary, they weren't fools. They wouldn't stay in the same place and let them attack them separately even though they knew that they were looking for them. Now, it was confirmed that the herdsmen had indeed received the news and left. They were most likely to gather in an undiscovered place and wait for them to leave or prepare for a counterattack. This was the worst-case scenario. If they hide, it won't be easy to find them again. The Empress looked worried. Even if the herdsmen hid, their food was still the Aboriginals. To be precise, they were feeding on the jade-wasted slaves who used the Aboriginals as their hosts. It would be great if we could launch a satellite. Ren Baqian couldn't help but think. Unfortunately, the satellite was still too far away. Perhaps it would take 30 or 50 years for this to happen. After sitting for a while, the Empress ordered 2 women from Mount Gongmu to fly into the sky to investigate. However, in less than 15 minutes, the 2 multicolored eagles fled to the top of the group in a panic. "Help! The two women from Mount Gongmu screamed in panic. The two multicolored eagles slid down from the sky. At this moment, everyone realized that hundreds of palm-sized pitch-black birds were surrounding them and attacking them one after another. When the multicolored eagles fell to the ground, there were still 20 to 30 black birds biting on their bodies and refusing to let go. Everyone spent some effort to repel these little things in the dark. By the time they rescued the two multicolored eagles, they were covered in injuries. Rinpoche picked up the bodies of the blackbirds that had been shot down and saw that they looked like bats and pterosaurs. They had a short beak filled with tiny, sharp teeth, a mammal-like tail, and a membrane-like wing with small claws at the front. This was another type of creature that wasn't strong but relied on numbers to win. It was very difficult to deal with them, especially at night. With such creatures in the air, it would be difficult to search for them in the sky. After staying in the same place for 3 days, they destroyed the forest and the valley and tried to find any traces left behind by the herdsmen. However, they still came up empty-handed. Chi Ziding had also caught up with them from behind. When Rinpoche saw him, he also saw the rhinoceros-like beast that he had seen when they first arrived. It took Rinpoche some effort to identify the original owners of the meat that was carried by the winged cavalry warriors. After hearing that the herdsmen here had also disappeared, Chi Ziding raised his eyebrows and said, "It seems like they have run away. It won't be easy to find them now. The mountains are so big that we won't be able to reach the end even if we walk for a year. It's almost impossible to find these people in the mountains. No matter what, let's go to the other two places first," the Empress said unwillingly. Previously, she didn't want these herdsmen to gather together. Now, she hoped that they would gather somewhere and wait for them. Chapter 787. The two teams split up again. A few days later, Rinpoche and the Empress arrived at the last location. As expected, they still didn't find anything. The herdsmen here were gone as well. Spread out and search to see if there are any traces of them. Be careful of those powerful beasts and try not to provoke them, the Empress immediately ordered. The two miserable-looking, multicolored eagles that hadn't regrown their feathers were released into the sky again. Less than 2 hours later, one of the multicolored eagles returned. Gongxing jumped down from the sky and shouted, "Your Majesty, we found a grove of Katsura fruits in the southeast." Rinpoche, who was massaging his legs, immediately jumped up and asked, "A grove of Katsura fruits?" "Yes, at least 100 of them," Gongxing replied. "Good stuff." Rinpoche clapped his hands together with a look of excitement on his face. Katsura fruits were good stuff. Apart from their taste, their biggest function was to nourish the spirit. On his way to Tianjing Basin last year, he spent a lot of effort but didn't find many Katsura fruits. He didn't expect to find a grove here. Now that he had completed the first step of the Yang boosting technique, his focus was on the second volume of the ancient scroll of methods. However, the first step of the recuperation technique was to visualize a space of the 5 elements, which he couldn't advance for several months. No matter how he visualized it, it would eventually collapse and turn into nothingness. Rinpoche always felt that it was because his spirit wasn't strong enough. With each visualization, even though the things he visualized could exist longer than before and he became more familiar with the visualization technique, there was still a long way to go before the visualized things could exist for a long time. He didn't know how long it would take to achieve this step. Finding a grove of Katsura fruits at this time was like sending charcoal in the snowy weather. "Your Majesty," Rinpoche turned to the Empress and said, "I'll go take a look." "I'll go too." The Empress glanced at the forest in the distance. It was meaningless to stay here any longer, and she had no choice but to send the winged cavalry out to search. Under Gongxing's guidance, the two of them and the guards took 6 hours to reach a mountaintop. They saw a forest halfway up the mountain with leaves as big as cattail leaf fans. From time to time, 1 or 2 white fruits could be seen among the leaves. Sure enough, they are Katsura fruits, and they are ripe. Rinpoche was overjoyed when he saw this. "Ha, mine, they are all mine." With these Katsura fruits, I should be able to break through the first step. It felt like an ordinary person who had won a 50 million prize. After laughing heartily, he looked at the Empress, held her hand, and said, "Your Majesty, these are all yours. You only remembered now? Don't give me that." The Empress snorted. After being talkative for so many times, she was more or less immune to it. These things are really beneficial to your cultivation. However, there are still some things in this forest that I need to deal with. After the Empress finished speaking, she took a step forward and exuded an imposing aura. Immediately, a rustling sound could be heard in the forest. Thousands of colorful snakes rose from the trees and flicked their tongues in the direction of the group. No wonder the Katsura fruits in this forest haven't been picked and eaten. Rinpoche was speechless. He had previously discovered snakes, but he didn't realize that there were so many of them. Although the Katsura fruit wasn't considered a treasure, it could be considered a rare treasure. It grew slowly, was rare, and was loved by apes. It was said that eating the Katsura fruit had the effect of awakening intelligence. Rinpoche found it a little strange that such a mature forest hadn't been picked. It turned out that a group of snakes and insects were entrenched here. The Empress strode into the forest and slashed her fingers in the air like a sword. The surrounding snakes that surged toward her were cut off, and it was as if there was a rain of blood in the forest. "I'm waiting for you," the Empress suddenly shouted. She stretched her right hand into the air at lightning speed and retreated from the forest in a flash. Rinpoche looked at the Empress's hand and saw that she was pinching a small green snake with 2 fingers. It was as thick as a chopstick and as long as a palm. It was writhing endlessly between her fingers. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and let out a bovine cry. It wasn't soft, but it paled in comparison to the roar of the Empress. "Is this the leader of this group of snakes?" Rinpoche looked carefully at the small snake and saw that there were 2 small horns protruding from its head. He was shocked and asked, "Is this a dragon?" The Empress took a closer look and said, "It has the bloodline of a dragon. However, it's not as good as the one in Great Xia's palace. The bloodline is very thin. That's still a good thing." Rinpoche looked at the small snake between the Empress's fingers and clicked his tongue in wonder. He wanted to see what the dragon in Great Xia's palace looked like if he had the chance. He didn't know if he could use the activated charcoal mask to exchange for that dragon. If it couldn't, he would throw another 100 stink bombs. Rinpoche suddenly felt that this was a good idea. It's nothing. Refining this snake will at most produce a drop of impure dragon blood. However, the heart and gallbladder of this snake are somewhat useful. The Empress slid her left hand across the body of the snake, and 2 bean-sized objects appeared between her fingers. She stuffed them directly into Rinpoche's mouth. "Oh!" Rinpoche's eyes widened. He then licked the Empress's finger that was in his mouth. The Empress retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted and glared at him. Gong Xing, who was at the side, looked at the Empress with envy. The heart and gallbladder of the snake were too small, and Rinpoche couldn't even feel if he swallowed them. However, a warm current quickly rose from his stomach and spread throughout his body. The 2 bean-sized objects transformed into a large amount of essence blood that flowed into Rinpoche's body. His whole body turned red, and his head began to emit hot steam. Rinpoche immediately sat on the ground and tried his best to transform the essence blood into essence qi that circulated in his internal organs. After 2 hours, Rinpoche finally finished. The amount of essence qi in his body had increased by 20%, which was considered a great benefit. When he opened his eyes, the Empress had already cleaned up the snakes in the forest and was sitting at the side in a daze. "Your Majesty," Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. He was suddenly stuffed with a snake's gallbladder and heart, and then tossed around for a long time. This made him a little tired. The Empress glanced at the forest and said, "Well, it's all cleaned up. The forest is all yours." "Half of it." Rinpoche smiled cheekily. "This thing is useless to me." The Empress waved her hand. "It doesn't need to be useful as long as it tastes good." Rinpoche laughed, jumped onto a tree, and picked 4 katsura fruits. He threw 2 to Yu Xing, wiped the other 2 on his body, and handed them to the Empress. "This fruit tastes pretty good." The Empress glanced at him and said, "Your body is much dirtier than the fruits. You might as well not wipe them." Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your Majesty, can we have a chat?" "Humph." The Empress snorted twice before opening her mouth and biting off a piece of flesh. One day later, Rinpoche began to worry. He could only eat 4 katsura fruits a day before feeling his sea of knowledge swell to its limit. There were more than 110 trees in the forest, and there were 4 fruits on each tree. How long would it take for him to eat all of them? 10 days later, Qi Ziding and another group of people received the news and came to meet up. Now that all the herdsmen had disappeared, it was meaningless for the Empress to run around. Everyone discussed for a while and decided to simply stay in the forest with Rinpoche for a period of time. After Rinpoche had grasped the basics of the recuperation technique, the Empress and Rinpoche would return to Lan City. On the other hand, Shi Wanya would coordinate all the villages in the 60,000 mountains and investigate the situation in the border areas. Chapter 788. After the arrangements were made, the Skull Forest became much quieter. Only the Empress, Rinpoche, and 300 winged cavalry warriors were left as bodyguards. He even got the winged cavalry to chop some wood to build a few houses. He wasn't going to leave until they finished eating all the jackpot fruits here. He would eat 2 katsura fruits every morning and night. The rest of the time, he would either cultivate or accompany the Empress. This area could be considered to be full of vitality, and the scenery was beautiful. After living in the valley where the Earthine Spring was located for 3 months, moving to this place made them feel rather relaxed. At night, Rinpoche and the Empress sat on the roof and looked at the starry sky above their heads. Both of them held hands. Rinpoche really liked holding the Empress's hand. It was very soft and very delicate. The fragrance from the Empress's body wafted into his nose. He was surrounded by a vast wilderness, and he could hear the sounds of vicious beasts in the distance. The feeling of the 2 of them lying here and looking at the starry sky was much better than when they were in the palace. "Your Majesty, after we finish eating the jackdaw fruit, we should get married when we return, right?" Rinpoche asked. "Yes," the Empress replied softly. She was originally here to visit her mother's grave and accompany Rinpoche to the Earthine Spring to cultivate. She didn't expect so many things to happen and even delayed the wedding. The next thing to do was to find those herdsmen. This matter would be left to Shi Wanya and his elder brother. The most important thing about herders was that they were secretive and hard to find. In terms of strength, they weren't that great. The only worry was whether they had other trump cards, such as Lu Sheng, whom they had met the other day. In any case, it was time for her and Rinpoche to go back. Even though there was a radio station now, she couldn't always be away from the imperial court. Rinpoche turned over and looked at the Empress's smooth and clean side profile. "Is it going to be a betrothal gift?" "I don't need anything," the Empress replied casually. He was a little annoyed. Did he have to ask for his permission to give betrothal gifts? As the Emperor, what did he not have? She would accept whatever Rinpoche was willing to give her, even if it was a little white flower that stood out from the crowd. Rinpoche was surprised and said, "I know that Her Majesty doesn't lack anything, but the problem is, isn't it His Majesty's betrothal gift?" The Empress widened her eyes and turned her head to look at him. Rinpoche's shamelessness surprised her. "Isn't His Majesty going to marry me? This is my first time getting married." Before Rinpoche could finish his sentence, the furious Empress kicked him off the stage. Rinpoche lay on the ground and laughed out loud. The Empress descended from the sky and stepped on his stomach, causing him to sink into the ground. She then returned to her room without looking back. Rinpoche was left lying on the ground, groaning. Even though his defense had increased tremendously, the Empress's stomp had completely shattered the essence chi that covered his skin. After a long time, he rubbed his stomach and got up from the ground. The Empress had already closed the door. Rinpoche went forward and pushed the door. The Empress had bolted the door from the inside. "Your Majesty, let me in." Rinpoche looked resentful. This wooden house was a double suite. Rinpoche lived in the outer room, while the Empress lived in the inner room. Now that the Empress had locked the door, he couldn't go back at all. Unless he broke the door, his ending would be even worse. At this time, it was already early 2026 on Earth, 9 o'clock at night. When Rinpoche returned to Earth, he went to the room next door where the snacks were kept, but he didn't see Lin Shaola. Logically speaking, she would be living a befuddled life here every day. It wasn't easy for her to not be here today. Previously, he was afraid that something would happen to the herdsman, so he left Lin Shaola on Earth. Lin Shaola was a spirit wheel expert and could be said to be invincible on Earth. If anything went wrong, even a nuclear bomb wouldn't be able to stop her. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to see her figure at all. Fortunately, Lin Shaola was as peaceful as expected. She only ate and slept, completely treating the room with the snacks as her nest. After changing his clothes and going downstairs, he saw a few winged cavalry warriors watching a romance drama on TV. He saw them sitting there sighing with tears and snot on their faces. They almost hugged each other and cried. Rinpoche was heartbroken. They had fallen. This group of winged cavalry warriors had been on Earth for 5 years, and they had changed a lot. They were watching dramas, playing mobile games, and sending voice messages. Rinpoche was considering whether he should let them get married and have children on Earth. However, it wouldn't be easy for them to find a suitable woman to marry given their size. For example, Tong Jingye and the rest would play in the brothels in Lawn City, but they usually wouldn't stay overnight. There was no other reason than that they would die. However, he heard that Qinghua Courtyard, one of the 4 major courtyards in Lawn City, had a few more female Earthwell practitioners. They were left behind by Zedong Lai when he destroyed the sex in the Yun Nation. This made Qinghua Courtyard famous. Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan had fought at the top of the brothel several times. "Where's Librarian Lin?" Rinpoche looked at the winged cavalry warriors and really wanted to kick them out. "Lady Boss, can you see if she's on the roof?" Librarian Lin recently made a friend. One of the winged cavalry warriors turned to look at Rinpoche with tears in his eyes. The roof? Lin Shaola made a friend? While Rinpoche was puzzled, he heard a sound from the roof. Woof, woof. Without hesitation, Rinpoche went out of the house and jumped onto the roof. He saw Lin Shaola squatting on the roof in shorts and a singlet. She was looking into the distance and barking. Woof, woof, woof. Lin Shaola, woof, woof. Hearing this sound, Rinpoche didn't know whose husky it was. Rinpoche was shocked on the spot. This was Lin Shaola's friend? Making friends with a husky? Other people who came to Earth were degenerates, but Lin Shaola was the only one who was successful. "Hey, he invited me to play." Lin Shaola looked up at Rinpoche with a pair of eyes that shone with happiness on her delicate face. Rinpoche opened his mouth and didn't know how to react. Although he had been through a lot, this kind of thing still made him feel like he was at a loss. "I'm going then," Lin Shaola said before disappearing into the night without waiting for Rinpoche to reply. How could Rinpoche let her run around by herself? He jumped off the roof and headed in the direction of the sound. There weren't many houses in this area, and the sound just now came from more than 200 meters away, so it was easy to find. It was only one building away from Rinpoche's villa. That building was currently occupied by a few chefs hired by Rinpoche. After all, the winged cavalry warriors had a huge appetite, and they needed a few chefs. The amount of vegetables, fruits, and meat that were sent up the mountain every day was also huge. Outside the target villa, there was a commotion. It seemed like Lin Shaola had disturbed someone when she went in. Chapter 789. Who are you? If the 2 bodyguards had guns, they would have pulled them out by now. Unfortunately, they didn't have guns and were wondering if they should take out their ancestral yellow paper talismans. After all, Lin Shaola's appearance was too scary, as if she had appeared out of thin air. Lin Shaola ignored them. She squatted in the yard and grabbed the front paws of a husky with a happy look on her face. It was a real husky, not Howren's Lily. "Don't panic," a man shouted toward the courtyard from a window on the second floor of the villa. He then laughed and asked, "Miss, who are you?" Seeing that Lin Xiaola ignored him, the man laughed at himself and said, "It seems like you like it very much. It's called Hudo." "Who's that?" A man in black suddenly looked up and got a shock. He saw a man squatting on the wall with a forehead like a light bulb. They didn't know when he had appeared there. Both of them felt like they had seen a ghost. "Sorry to disturb you. Speaking of which, we are neighbors." Ren Baqian smiled, landed lightly in the courtyard, looked up at the man on the second floor, and asked, "Don't you think so?" He recognized this man as soon as he saw him. A few years ago, he wanted to hire a bodyguard from the martial arts center and invited Rinpochian. In fact, he had invited Rinpochian 3 times in the past few years. Unfortunately, Rinpochian was busy each time. He didn't expect to meet under such circumstances and had to admit that the other party was really impressive. Other people use honey traps, but you use dog traps. Sure enough, one had to open up a new path. Those who could become big shots were not ordinary people. "I didn't expect to meet Mr. Run under such circumstances. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Please come in for a chat. Bring Mr. Run in. Don't make a fuss. He's a distinguished guest." The man on the second floor was surprised to see Rinpochian and then smiled happily. A moment later, Rinpochian sat on the sofa and looked at the man opposite him. He was a fat man in his 50s, wearing glasses, and was wearing casual clothes. These weren't important. After all, he was a famous big shot in the country. Sure San. Rinpochian had even been cheated by his company's games. The important thing was that there was a plate of braised pork on the table, as well as a bowl and chopsticks. Before Rinpochian came, the man was probably preparing to eat. "Try it. I was just about to eat, and you came at the right time. The pigs are reared by us, and you can't eat them outside. The taste is good, and they all like it." Sure San very warmly handed over the chopsticks and plate, making Rinpochian puzzled. "I've never heard of a greeting like treating someone to red braised pork as soon as they met." There's also a pile of imported handmade chocolates on the side. Did he think that he was Lin Xiaola? However, he would send a bunch of chocolates and candies to his house every week, so it was normal for people to find out. The other party had indeed put in a lot of effort, but it was a pity that they had misunderstood some things. Apart from that, the biggest mistake of the enemy was that they didn't have the White Rabbit creamy candies. Didn't they see Lin Xiaola hugging the husky and rolling on the ground? Rinpochian watched as the other party finished his meal and someone tidied up the food. Shirsan then laughed and said, "I haven't eaten for a day and am very hungry. I'm really sorry for being impolite." "I'm fine." Rinpochian smiled. The person in front of him was quite interesting. If it was anyone else, he would have turned around and left. Eating in front of me. Does he think I'm his subordinate? However, this person's expression and speech were very sincere. He was indeed the most interesting of the legendary IT bigwigs. Rinpochian was sizing him up, and the other party was also sizing him up while eating. Rinpochian had always been elusive, and it was somewhat unexpected to see him today. Furthermore, the person in front of him was quite different from the photo that he had seen before. He originally looked strong, but now that he was in front of the real person, he realized that he wasn't just strong. He was like a wall in front of him. The skin that was exposed outside his clothes reflected a metallic glow, which was even more amazing. Not to mention his temperament, his shiny bald head, and his lack of eyebrows. No matter how he looked at it, he wasn't a good person. If he didn't have the information of the other party and knew that he wouldn't offend others if they didn't offend him, he really wouldn't want to sit face to face with this person. Ordinary people naturally wouldn't pose any threat to a bigwig like him, but the person in front of him was different. Rinpochian's aura was really uncomfortable. An ordinary person facing him would be like an ordinary person facing a ferocious tiger-like beast. This young lady is really childish. Hudo is raised by my daughter. If you like it, you can come and play when you're free. Seeing that you're about the same age as my daughter, you should be able to strike up a conversation. I'm old, and there's a generation gap between my daughter and me. Sure San laughed. Rinpoche grinned, revealing his white teeth. Lin Xiaola's real age was probably not much younger than Ding San's. Seeing her rolling around on the ground happily with her good friend the husky on one hand was her nature, and on the other hand, she treated the people in this house like ants. Shursen said a few polite words and then leaned back. Rinpoche knew that the other party was going to get down to business. Mr. Run, is the 15th set of Qigong that the nation has recently implemented related to you? Shursan asked. Originally, he wanted to get to know Rinpoche first, but after trying a few times, he realized that Rinpoche wasn't that easy to approach. Since he had the opportunity today, it was better to get straight to the point. Moreover, this thing was already out in the open, so there was no need to hide it. Rinpoche nodded. Although Mr. Rin isn't well known, you're an extraordinary person. Shursan exclaimed. I don't know if Mr. Rin has any better ones. In fact, you shouldn't have looked for me about this. The nation doesn't only have the 15th set of Qigong. Over the years, the nation has deduced hundreds and thousands of techniques. This set of Qigong is the most stable and most suitable for ordinary people. There are many better cultivation techniques in the country's hands. With your status, it won't be difficult to obtain them. Although I have some different techniques, they might not be comparable to the ones in the nation's hands at the current stage, Rinpoche said bluntly. There was no need to hide this matter from the other party. Over the years, the nation had invested a lot of energy into these techniques, and the harvest was naturally huge. What if those techniques aren't suitable for me? As far as I know, these techniques came from Mr. Rin. If you can help me, I will definitely reward you generously. San changed the word Qigong to techniques in his words. As for what those cultivation methods were, he also had an idea in his heart. Rinpoche looked at him and laughed. San looked very relaxed, but in fact, he looked nervous. It seemed like he wasn't lying. After all, cultivation also depended on one's innate talent. Although the nation had deduced a lot of techniques, they were based on the things that Rinpoche provided. There would definitely be some people who were limited by this so-called innate talent. Although this person was a big shot in the IT industry and was considered a top figure by ordinary people, that was all there was to it. Would the country still take out all the cultivation techniques for him to see? However, it wasn't a bad thing to have such a friend. I can't guarantee this. Tell me the details, and I will see if there is any way. After Rinpoche finished speaking, San couldn't hide his ecstasy. In that case, I will have to trouble Mr. Rin. Regardless of whether it succeeds or not, I will definitely reward you generously. Rinpoche nodded slightly. After speaking about this matter, San let go of his worries and completely relaxed. After the two of them talked for a while, San brought up the matter of hiring a few bodyguards again. After all, apart from the winged cavalry, the best martial artists were only available in Rinpoche's martial arts centers in the nation. Every wealthy person dreamed of hiring a few experts from Rinpoche's side during this period of impending major changes. 2 days later, Rinpoche walked to the room filled with snacks. Lin Xiaola was lying there sleeping soundly with a pile of candies in her arms. Rinpoche kicked her in the crotch. Lin Xiaola screamed and jumped up. She casually gave Rinpoche 2 claw strikes. However, this time, Rinpoche covered his face tightly. Lin Xiaola's claws, which contained 99% of her strength, only left 2 rows of white marks on his arm. Do you want to stay here or go back with me? Rinpoche asked. Now that there were no traces of those herdsmen, Lin Xiaola didn't have to stay here anymore. More importantly, she had been going to San's place every day to play with her friends. Rinpoche began to worry about leaving her here. In addition to worrying that she would be tricked, he was also worried that she would be on the wanted list when he came back one day. After all, she was a ferocious beast that killed without batting an eyelid. I'm not going back. Lin Xiaola immediately shrank back after hearing Rinpoche's words, and her claws lit up. It seemed like she was so happy with so many candies that she forgot about home. Chapter 790. In a mountain forest, a hamster stood on the ground and stared blankly at the forest in front of it. It opened its mouth and let out a shocking roar. Visible ripples appeared in the air. It was as if the air had turned into liquid. A few winged cavalry warriors in the distance couldn't help but cover their ears. This sound was extremely harmful to the winged cavalry warriors. Fortunately, after suffering a few beatings, the roaring emperor understood that it couldn't roar at the winged cavalry warriors. Following the roar of the roaring emperor, a terrifying sound wave came from the forest in the distance. However, if one listened carefully, they would be able to tell that it wasn't one sound, but a sound wave formed by the combination of dozens of sounds. It was a group of howling monkeys. The Empress and Rinpochian stayed here and wiped out the surrounding beasts for a period of time. A few days ago, a group of howling monkeys moved into the forest from an unknown place. They were creatures that moved slowly but were extremely loud. Although they weren't as loud as the roaring emperor, the sound of a howling monkey could be heard from 15 kilometers away. The combined sound of 20 to 30 howling monkeys was enough to make other creatures retreat. With their arrival, the roaring emperor also met its match. For 3 days in a row, the roaring emperor roared at the group of howling monkeys 5 kilometers away from the forest to see who was louder. Of course, the only result was that the winged cavalry warriors were annoyed. All the birds in the forest were scared away by them. At this time, Rinpochian was sitting under a tree with his eyes closed. In his sea of knowledge, the center of the darkness was divided into 5 areas. Red, yellow, white, green, and blue clouds each occupied an area and slowly flowed in a very small area. After an unknown period of time, the yellow clouds began to shrink inward and condense into a ball. When the yellow clouds dispersed again, there was a lot less of them, and there was a huge yellow stone in the middle of the cloud. Following this, the green clouds began to rotate, and a few grass seeds condensed after a while. Afterward, flames, metal pieces, and water condensed in the corresponding colors of the cloud one after another. At this time, Rinpochian's mind was even more focused, and all his attention was focused on the 5 condensed substances to maintain the stability of their structure. However, 2 hours later, Rinpochian felt a wave of fatigue, and his mind went blank. The 5 substances immediately disintegrated into clouds and mist, which then began to dissipate. Rinpochian opened his eyes and rubbed his head. As expected, he had failed. The difficulty of this recuperation technique was much higher than he had imagined. It was so difficult that he was a little surprised. Logically speaking, after cultivating the visualization, one would have a considerable understanding of the 5 substances. Their divine sense would also be tempered to a certain extent. Even if it was difficult to cultivate the recuperation technique, it wouldn't be too difficult. For example, he had already eaten more than 50 kappa fruits, but he still hadn't reached the entry level of the recuperation technique. Moreover, he was still far from it. If he was like this, then how did other people who cultivated this cultivation method do it? Could it be that every person who practiced this technique had a large number of natural treasures at their disposal? Or was the gap between him and his predecessors so big? Rinpochian felt that both possibilities were possible. Although this cultivation technique required a large amount of medicinal herbs to bathe in, it seemed that it could be cultivated as long as one had the resources. It also had a considerable requirement for talent. Of course, with enough resources, the difference in talent could be made up for. For example, the kappa fruits in front of him. If he had such a forest, he should be able to enter the entry level. However, such a forest was also hard to come by. Don't be anxious. This cultivation method should have been lost for a long time. No one has imparted their experience, and no one to learn from. You can only rely on yourself, step by step. The Empress knew that Rinpochian had failed when she saw his expression. Her voice traveled to Rinpochian's ears from afar. Rinpochian raised his head and smiled at the beautiful Empress in the distance. He nodded his head to show that he wasn't anxious. Although he wasn't anxious, he was a little worried. If his kappa fruit forest couldn't allow him to enter the entry level of the recuperation technique, he didn't know when he would be able to do so. Rinpoche carefully pondered over every detail of his cultivation and felt that something was wrong. The construction wasn't smooth, and this was probably the reason why his progress was so slow. After pondering for a few more days, Rinpoche began to have some clues. The cause of the problem seemed to be the construction of the world in his sea of knowledge. That construction wasn't only about visualizing and condensing an object, but also about visualizing and condensing a world with all 5 elements. For the people of this world, constructing such a world was a very natural thing. In their hearts, heaven and earth were earth, water, fire, and wind, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. These were everything in heaven and earth. Therefore, when constructing such a world, they didn't have any doubts at all. As for Rinpoche, this was the problem. In his heart, the world was first the universe, then the planet. To construct a universe with the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, he couldn't do it at all. Therefore, it was difficult for him to make any progress. If he couldn't solve this problem, not to mention this kappa fruit forest, even if this forest was added, he wouldn't be able to take that step. However, if he tried to visualize and condense, like the people who practiced this technique in the past, he realized that he couldn't do it either. This was because he had learned about the structure of the universe, galaxies, stars, and planets since he was young. Therefore, if he wanted to abandon everything and treat heaven and earth as the whole world, he would first feel that there were obstacles everywhere, unless he could forget everything he had learned in the past. However, after serious consideration, Rinpoche felt that it was better to let the Empress beat him into amnesia than to forget everything he had learned. Rinpoche seriously considered the possibility of being beaten into amnesia by the Empress and then recovering his memory after he succeeded in his cultivation. He even consulted the Messier 87 department about this matter. However, after hearing that there might be some unpredictable sequelae, Rinpoche decisively gave up on this idea. Rinpoche decided to go big. Visualize a singularity, then detonate it. Open up a universe in the sea of knowledge. When that time came, there would be an entire universe in his mind. It would be the beginning of heaven and earth, and he would be much stronger than the people who practiced this technique in the past. However, when the Empress heard his idea, her face turned ashen. Do you want to become an idiot? Detonate a singularity in the sea of knowledge, and use this singularity to engulf the entire sea of knowledge? As long as there is a little mistake, you will become an idiot if it's light, and your soul will be obliterated if it's heavy. You will no longer exist in this world. The Empress said coldly, "If that's the case, why did you come here? Back then, I could have smacked you to death with one palm, and at least your soul would have remained." After saying this coldly, the Empress softened her voice and said, "You aren't in a hurry to practice this technique. Take your time, and you will eventually find a way. Even if you don't practice this technique, I can still push you to the spirit wheel level by piling up treasures. You have only been practicing for 3 years now, and there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Why be so impulsive?" When Rinpoche heard this, he felt that he was being thoughtless and immediately gave up. He had plenty of time, and there was no need to fight for this moment. Even if this cucurbita forest wasn't enough, as long as he guarded this forest, there would be another batch after 10 years. If 2 times wasn't enough, he would do it 3 times. If 3 times wasn't enough, he would do it 4 times. Furthermore, he might be able to think of a better way. However, he still sighed reluctantly and said, "In order to keep up with your Majesty's footsteps, I am willing to take some risks. However, the thought of losing the opportunity to accompany your Majesty because of this will be the biggest regret of my life." Seeing that he had given up, the Empress heaved a sigh of relief. She was really afraid that he would blow up his own brain at some point. After all, she couldn't stop him from practicing in the sea of knowledge. Furthermore, she couldn't tie him to her belt and watch him all the time. Chapter 791. The 60,000 mountains were vast and boundless, and even the aboriginals only occupied a small part of it. There was still a large area that no one had set foot on. Barren mountains, fearsome beasts, and some unknown races occupied it. In a dark swamp, the trees were not dense, but each tree required 6 to 7 people to surround. The canopy above almost blocked out all the sunlight. When one looked up, it seemed as if it would press down at any time, making one feel depressed and almost unable to breathe. Most of the creatures in this swamp were snakes and insects. Occasionally, frogs or other amphibians of different sizes could be seen moving about. More than 20 figures were either standing or sitting in an open space in the swamp. There was a considerable distance between each figure, as if there was an air wall separating them. Indifference exuded from each figure. They're looking for us. It's all because Bo Air exposed his whereabouts and didn't take him down that the situation became like this. Our pastoral forest has been burned. Without pastoral forest for a long time, the jade-wasted slaves won't be able to control themselves. We can't wait too long. Right now, they're looking for us everywhere. If we make a move now, we will meet them directly. Our existence has already been discovered by them, so we will meet them sooner or later. As long as we make a move in the future, they will notice. Are you going to feed on fearsome beasts in the future? They will search everywhere and break through the boundaries that they have always kept. Their actions have already threatened our survival. We must restrict their actions. Kill them. Kill the leader. There are more than 10 million of them. They are just some abandoned people. Kill their leader first, then kill those who are looking for us. Those people are not weak. We can use them to plant 2 more pastoral forests. This will only arouse their anger. The conflict between us and them cannot be reconciled. They are food, and we are the predators. We should not have been discovered by them. The situation that has existed for 10,000 years is about to be broken. It is all Boar's fault. He is too young. There are many things that he doesn't know. Voices were being transmitted among the many figures. There was no agitation, no quarrel, no anger, no hesitation, and no contempt. Every figure maintained an indifferent attitude as they discussed this matter that was closely related to them. Jagu, it's your turn to declare your position. You are the leader here, and also the oldest. As one of the figures spoke, all the figures turned their gazes to a figure who had been silent all along. This is our duty. We must stop them. The figure who had been silent all this while said, in the darkness, there was an earthy yellow mist floating. The mist was not motionless at this time. Instead, it was rotating like water that was being stirred. Within the mist, there was an invisible vortex that was stirring everything and sucking in the mist. Gradually, the mist turned into a yellow dragon, spiraling in a certain direction. When the mist reached a certain point, its forward momentum came to an abrupt halt. The entire khaki dragon was sucked into a point and finally became a khaki rock. As for the stone, it was also spinning in a spiral trajectory. After an unknown period of time, the stone gradually collapsed. Wisps of earthy yellow mist peeled off from the stone and disappeared into the darkness until the stone also turned into nothingness. At the same time, Rinpoche opened his eyes. He turned his head and looked to the side. The Empress was lying on a wooden platform in front of the house, looking at a laptop. There was also a wooden parasol on the platform to block the sunlight. The computer was playing a 3D image of the origin of the universe. The planets moved along their trajectories as if they were going to rush out of the computer screen. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan, who were sitting behind the Empress and fanning themselves, were in charge of exclaiming in surprise. Run Baqian drank a cup of water, took a book about the history of the universe, and laid down beside the Empress. He was basking in the sun while reading the book. All he needed was a cup of tea. However, the spring water in the mountains had a sweet taste that lingered in his mouth. Do you think this is how the world was formed? The Empress turned to look at Rinpoche. No one can see it, and it's all speculation based on the existing evidence. It's true, but it can't be confirmed, Rinpoche said. It's amazing. It would be great if we could see it from the sky. The Empress exclaimed. I heard that Earth has started to organize a tour to the moon. If your Majesty wants to join, we can also go to outer space to see the dazzling scenery. Rinpoche raised his eyebrows and put his hand on the Empress's waist. The Empress poked his waist with her finger, and his whole body immediately went numb. Even though his defense had been greatly improved, he still couldn't defend against the Empress's finger. It didn't even have much of a defensive effect. The Empress's understanding of the use of power and the human body wasn't something that he could compare with. I'm only interested in the sky. Although the Empress said this, her eyes were somewhat moved. She had already learned from Rinpoche that the world was a planet, and the two of them had even named it. She was still interested in seeing inhabited planets from other planets. However, riding a rocket to go beyond the planet was akin to entrusting one's life to someone else, and the Empress didn't like this. Rinpoche's body went numb for a long time before he could finally move. He groaned and sniffed the Empress's neck. It was a combination of the fragrance of flowers and a delicate fragrance. It's not a bad idea to go and take a look when there's a chance. It won't be long before the technology matures. When that time comes, going to the moon will be as easy as taking a plane. Rinpoche said. The advancement of technology was always getting faster and faster. It took thousands of years for human civilization to enter the first industrial revolution. However, 100 years after the first industrial revolution, they entered the second industrial revolution. The invention of a steam engine became the driving force for human progress. New technologies emerged and allowed the world to advance at a faster speed. The same was true for the aerospace industry. At present, Earth could already send a small number of people to travel to the moon. 2 groups of people had already set foot on the moon and returned successfully. Nowadays, the most hotly debated topic abroad was the colonization of the moon. Many netizens had even drawn up a timetable for colonization. However, the trend in China and abroad was completely different, and the 15th set of qi cultivation was currently the most eye-catching. It was just as Rinpoche thought. After all, even though this set of martial arts had been improved, it still required a lot of food to supplement itself, and it would be easily discovered by others. Furthermore, some talented people could see initial effects in just a few months. It was common for middle school and high school students to increase their strength by more than 50 kilograms within a few months. How could such a situation be overlooked? Chapter 792. Rinpoche and the Empress strolled in a valley. Many lantern-like fist-sized flowers were emitting blue, red, and pink lights. The lights weren't strong, but the countless flowers made it so that there wasn't a single dark corner in the valley. Countless colorful lights shone in the valley, forming an extremely resplendent picture. Your Majesty, this place is so beautiful. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan followed behind with admiration and happiness written all over their faces. Girls always lacked resistance to such beautiful scenery. This is simply the Valley of Resplendence. Rinpoche exclaimed and took a picture of this scene with his camera. This valley was discovered by the winged cavalry. It was said that this place was strange and beautiful, so Rinpoche and the Empress specially came to tour it at night. He felt as if he had seen the world of Avatar. All kinds of resplendent plants grew in this valley. Many flying insects were flying around in the valley, and small beasts would occasionally pop their heads out of the flowers. Rinpoche saw a lantern flower slowly open and swallow a flying insect that was attracted to it. Although this place was beautiful, it was full of danger for those flying insects. The Empress strolled in the forest with the flowers blooming beside her feet. Her eyes reflected the colorful lights, and her face revealed a look of love. This place shall be called the Valley of Resplendence. The Empress immediately decided on the name for this valley. A lizard that was more than a meter long and had camouflage on its body was not far away from them. It shot out its long tongue and swept away the flying insects that were attracted by the light from the lantern flower. After sizing them up curiously, it fixed its eyes on other targets. If we build a house here and see this scenery every night, it must be extremely beautiful, Rinpoche exclaimed. Even he was moved by the scenery in this valley. Beauty always made people gasp in admiration, and no one could remain indifferent. Sightseeing in the valley was like an adventure in a beautiful painting. There were lantern flowers that were 1 meter tall, and the bushes were decorated with small flowers that emitted white light. There were also trees with countless branches hanging down like willows. If this scene was filmed, it would be a fascinating film. They walked around until midnight before reluctantly turning back. If your majesty likes it, you can come again tomorrow, Rinpoche said with a smile. This valley was about 4 hours away from the skullcap fruit forest. It was just that the entrance to the valley was narrow and covered by trees, so it had not been discovered. All right, the water Empress nodded. Hearing that they would come again tomorrow, Qing Yuan and Hong Wan's faces lit up with happiness. After another day, the Empress and Rinpoche brought Qing Yuan, Hong Wan, and more than 10 guards to that valley again. However, they had only walked for an hour when they saw an unforgettable scene. Countless green specks of light floated in the air like a layer of light gauze, covering the sky and changing the color of the distant sky. That's... Rinpoche carefully raised his head and looked at the green veil that was moving toward them with a puzzled look on his face. Soon after, Rinpoche realized something. He took out a pair of binoculars from his backpack and looked ahead. His facial expression immediately changed. Your Majesty, it's the jade-waisted slaves. There are at least 100,000 of them, and their target is us. Rinpoche didn't believe that the jade-waisted slaves were just passing by. Based on their direction, their target must be them. Qing Yuan, Hong Wan, and the winged cavalry warriors' facial expressions changed drastically upon hearing Rinpoche's words. Let's go back, the Empress said coldly, emitting a chill. Everyone turned their mounts around and hurriedly rushed toward the Kitsura fruit forest. Your Majesty, we can't handle so many jade-waisted slaves no matter what. Furthermore, they are faster than us. We can't outrun their pursuit. Rinpoche shouted at the Empress as he felt the strong wind coming toward them. We just have to hold on until daytime, the Empress replied. They still have herdsmen and maybe even that expert like Lu Sheng. We have to find a place to hide and guard a passage in order to hold on until daytime. Rinpoche shouted. Your mount is fast. Go back and get them ready to evacuate, the Empress said. In fact, Qi Shui wasn't slow either, but the Empress naturally wouldn't leave the others behind under such circumstances. Your Majesty, be careful. Rinpoche knew that the situation was urgent and didn't dawdle. He shouted at the Empress and rode the Crow General back the way they came. Not far in front of the Kitsura fruit forest, a row of wooden houses had been built. There were a few bonfires there. Other than the winged cavalry warriors who were on night watch, everyone else was sitting around the bonfires. Wooden cylinders were passed around in their hands, and everyone took a few puffs with an intoxicated look on their faces. Scorpion tubes. These aboriginals were really inhaling scorpions. In addition to the aroma of roasting scorpions, the scorpion tubes also emitted a gas that stimulated the brain after the scorpion's venom was roasted. The more venomous these scorpions were, the better. Even the winged cavalry warriors would feel their bodies become light after taking a few puffs. This was a very common form of entertainment for the aboriginals. Rinpoche didn't pay much attention to it after asking if it was addictive and wouldn't cause any problems. Sometimes he would also take a few puffs. At this moment, Rinpoche rushed back and saw everyone engaging in this popular leisure activity. He let out a long whistle from afar. Everyone shuddered and got up from the ground to look into the darkness. Everyone, get ready to evacuate immediately, Rinpoche shouted. Everyone's expression changed drastically. This was a group of 300 winged cavalry warriors with the Empress in charge, yet they actually had to evacuate immediately. What kind of danger was this? Sir Rin, where's Her Majesty? Someone immediately shouted. Her Majesty is behind us and is rushing over. I came back to inform you first. Leave everything behind and bring the mounts over. Everyone, get ready and evacuate once Her Majesty returns. Following Rinpoche's words, everyone became chaotic, picked up their weapons, and ran to bring their mounts. Who knows if there are any caves nearby? It's best if they can only accommodate 1 or 2 people and can accommodate everyone inside. Rinpoche added, Sir Run, there are 2 caves. They were discovered by our brothers when they were looking for food. Someone immediately shouted. Location? Distance? One is half an hour to the west, and the other is half an hour to the northeast. The space in the northeast is bigger and has a mountain spring, but the entrance is also wider. How wide? 3 people can enter and exit at a height of 4 meters. It's the cave in the northeast. Lead the way later. Bring all the boxes of insecticide. Rinpoche instructed everyone to get busy. Sir Ren, what's going on? Someone asked after getting ready. Those herdsmen are coming back with more than 100,000 jade-wasted slaves. Rinpoche said with an ugly expression. Everyone's faces turned ugly when they heard this. They could reluctantly cope with 10,000 jade-wasted slaves. Coupled with Rinpoche's insecticide, 20,000 jade-wasted slaves could barely resist. However, they couldn't resist more than 100,000 jade-wasted slaves. When their numbers reached a certain level, there would be a qualitative change. No matter what stood in their way, they would be swept away. Just like the stomach worms, a single stomach worm could be trampled to death with 1 foot, but when countless stomach worms gathered together, even the most powerful fierce beast would flee upon hearing the sound of it. The jade-wasted slaves were countless times more dangerous than the stomach worms. Sir Rin, you and Her Majesty will leave in a while. Your mounts are fast, and we will stop them. A winged cavalry warrior immediately shouted. That's right. Everyone immediately responded. Cut the crap. Rinpoche scolded. He and Her Majesty could indeed escape, but how could the Empress do such a thing? If she could, she wouldn't be the Empress. After a while, the Empress and the others rushed back. Your Majesty, there's a cave in the northeast about an hour's journey. It can accommodate everyone, Rinpoche shouted. Your Majesty, we will stop them. You and Surin go first. I'm the Empress. The Empress said coldly. Everyone listen to my orders. Set off in the northeast. The chaotic sound of hooves could be heard as the Empress led 300 winged cavalry warriors toward the northeast like a torrent. If anything goes wrong, leave first and stay on Earth for 7 days before coming back. These guys can't do anything to me. The Empress's words reached Rinpoche's ears along the way. Rinpoche immediately laughed and raised his voice. I will naturally advance and retreat with Your Majesty. Without Your Majesty by my side, this world will just be a boring one for me, and the future days will become my torture. The Empress glanced at him and didn't say anything else. Chapter 793. Rinpoche sat on the Crow General's back and felt the oncoming wind. From time to time, he would turn his head to look at the green clouds that were getting closer and closer. Based on their current speed, they would catch up in another 15 minutes. How much farther? Rinpoche shouted against the wind. On the mountain wall in front, the winged cavalry warrior leading the way was riding a jumping goat. In fact, the ones accompanying the Empress here were the earliest winged cavalry warriors, and their mounts were all jumping goats. Rinpoche looked ahead and could only see a vague silhouette in the darkness. He couldn't tell the distance at all. However, he knew one thing: a horse running from a mountain that's so far away. This was especially true when they were being chased. Suddenly, a cry of alarm came from behind. A jumping goat suddenly stepped on a crack in a rock and fell. The winged cavalry warrior spun a few times in the air and tried to adjust his body before landing on the ground. Another rider on the jumping goat reached out to grab the winged cavalry warrior's wrist and pulled him behind him. However, With one more rider, the jumping goat immediately slowed down. Upon seeing this, the winged cavalry warrior who had landed earlier jumped back onto the ground and ran wildly on his two legs. Even with the strength of a winged cavalry warrior, he didn't fall behind in a short period of time and followed closely behind the group. "Throw me your baggage," another person shouted at him. The winged cavalry warrior threw all the baggage and weapons he was carrying to the other party. This way, he didn't slow down at all. However, because they were running so fast in the dark and there were so many rocks in the nearby mountains, more than a dozen people quickly fell behind due to injuries or other reasons. Some of them were injured by the cracks in the rocks after being thrown off their mounts or were injured when they fell. Normally, these minor injuries wouldn't matter, but at this time, the jade-waisted slaves were following closely behind. "Don't bother about us. Your Majesty, brothers, let's stop them for a while." More than a dozen people simply stopped running and gathered together. They calmly pulled out their sabers and turned to look at the green clouds in the sky. The others turned to look behind them and saw more than a dozen figures wielding sabers in the darkness, as well as the emerald green clouds that were rushing toward them. The anger in their eyes could practically ignite a flame. In the blink of an eye, a portion of the green clouds shrouded them, and they let out a roar before vanishing into it. The Empress didn't even turn her head. Her face was ashen. Ever since she ascended the throne, she had never suffered such humiliation. "Your Majesty, I will avenge them," Rinpoche shouted worriedly at the Empress. A quarter of an hour later, the green cloud had almost touched the tail of the group. When everyone turned their heads, they could already see the densely packed jade-waisted slaves. Their twisted faces were filled with bloodlust and madness. The indistinct sound of the flute was like maggots in the bones, entangling everyone. Everyone finally arrived in front of Mountain Wall. There was a cave about 7 or 8 meters above the ground, and there were some vines hanging from the cave entrance. "Your Majesty, it's right in front," the winged cavalry leader shouted. "Leave the mount behind and enter the cave," the Empress shouted. Even though many of the winged cavalry warriors couldn't bear to do this, they knew that there was no other way. One after another, they jumped down from their mounts, sprinted forward, and jumped 7 to 8 meters into the cave. The Empress turned her head and saw that the green cloud had already pounced toward the tail of the group. Her face turned green as she pounced toward the green cloud. "Your Majesty!" Upon seeing this scene, many of the winged cavalry warriors stopped, drew their swords, and were about to turn back. "All of you, enter the cave." The Empress's voice came at the right time. In the blink of an eye, the Empress was surrounded by the green cloud, and a large number of jade-waisted slaves fell like raindrops. "Give me those 2 boxes. The rest of you, enter the cave and don't waste time," Rinpoche shouted. When 2 winged cavalry warriors stopped beside him with the boxes, the 3 of them opened the boxes and threw the glass bottles filled with liquid out. From where the Empress was standing to where the 3 of them were, the liquid from the broken glass bottles seemed to have formed a path. Rinpoche held a lighter in his hand and finally felt more at ease. "Your Majesty, use the big fireball technique, retreat." At this time, the Empress was completely surrounded by the jade-waisted slaves, and they couldn't even see her figure. The jade-waisted slaves behind were still pressing toward the 3 of them. "Scram!" The Empress's angry voice came from the layers of jade-waisted slaves. The Empress didn't know how many punches she threw in all directions in an instant. All the jade-waisted slaves were thrown out, creating an empty space around the Empress. The Empress's figure flashed and retreated in the direction of the 3 of them. However, at this moment, a gap suddenly appeared in the jade-waisted slaves behind the Empress, and a long whip wrapped around her leg. With this sudden change, Rinpoche didn't even have time to shout, "Your Majesty, be careful," the Empress snorted and said, "You're courting death." In an instant, her face was covered with purplish-red veins. She twisted her body and bent over to grab the whip. With a tug, a 12 or 13-year-old child was pulled out from the jade-waisted slaves. The whip was the child's left hand. The child had a ferocious look on his face as his other hand turned into an awl and stabbed toward the Empress. The Empress twisted her body slightly and slapped the child with her palm. Thump! Blood rained down from the sky. The entire upper body of the childlike creature turned into a rain of blood, and the only thing left in the Empress's hand was the whip. Seeing this, Rinpochian was finally relieved. Boom! As the flame in Rinpochian's hand was ignited, the sky in front of him suddenly turned into a sea of fire. The jade-wasted slaves that were chasing after the Empress were immediately turned into charcoal. When the flames dissipated, Rinpochian and the Empress entered the cave. The cave was about 3 meters wide and 4 meters high, and everyone crowded here to wait for the Empress. Your Majesty, everyone bowed. They then made way for the Empress. The Empress turned her head to look at the jade-wasted slaves that were pouncing toward her. She slapped her palm and immediately set off a gust of wind. The approaching jade-wasted slaves were immediately thrown off balance by the wind. Retreat 6 meters. Form groups of 5 and 2 groups. Everyone will take turns to block the enemy. The Empress walked into the cave without looking back. The 2 women from Mount Gongmu in the crowd saw the Empress's imposing manner, and their eyes were almost sparkling. 10 of the winged cavalry immediately blocked the entrance of the cave. 3 of them were in front, and the rest were at the back. They took turns to block the enemy and slowly retreated 10 meters before regaining their footing. The rest of the winged cavalry took over in batches, and most of them followed the Empress into the cave. Rinpochian got someone to open one of the remaining 2 boxes, which contained bottles of pesticide. A few bottles were smashed in the cave, and the smell of bitter almonds immediately rushed into everyone's nostrils. The jade-wasted slaves that flew in were slowed down in no time. They swayed in the air and were chopped down by the winged cavalry in front. Rinpochian left 1 box 15 meters behind the defensive line and informed the other winged cavalry warriors to throw a few more if the efficacy of the pesticide in the air weakened. This was to maintain a certain concentration of pesticide in the air at the entrance of the cave. After giving his instructions, he looked up at the entrance of the cave. At this moment, the cave had turned completely dark green. Countless jade-wasted slaves filled the entrance, and more than 10 of them rushed into the cave every second. Under such intensity, this line of defense would be broken in an instant if there was no pesticide. With the pesticide, every 3 winged cavalry warriors could only hold on for 2 minutes at most before they had to retreat and exchange places with the people behind them. Rinpochian made sure that the defensive line was temporarily stable before walking into the cave. After walking for more than 20 meters, he saw a spacious cave that could accommodate more than 1,000 people. The inside of the cave was filled with moss and fungi that emitted a faint blue light, allowing people to have an unobstructed field of vision in the cave. There was a spring in the middle of the cave, and the cold air above the spring turned into a visible mist. Other than the winged cavalry warriors, the only mounts in the cave were Chi Shui, the crow general, and the 2 multicolored eagles. The rest of the jumping goats had been left outside the cave and had probably turned into blood by now. Go and guard the entrance. Rinpochian patted the crow general's head and pointed to the entrance of the cave. There were also experts among the enemy. For example, that creature that looked like a child just now seemed weak, but actually had the strength of a Cardinal Heaven expert. If the Empress hadn't unleashed her full strength in an instant, it would have taken a lot of effort for someone else to take it down. Rinpochian looked around and asked the winged cavalry warriors to confirm that there were no other entrances or exits before walking to the side of the Empress, who was standing beside the spring in deep thought. Your Majesty, these people are blocking the way outside. We can only think of a solution during the day, Rinpochian said. The winged cavalry warriors have already abandoned their mounts. Even if they retreat during the day, we won't be able to escape from their pursuit. If we are caught in the wilderness, we might as well stay here, since we still have the advantage of the terrain, the Empress said faintly. Rinpochian smiled. The current situation made it seem like he and the others were like turtles in a jar. Aren't you nervous? The Empress seemed to have noticed the smile on his face and turned her head to ask. Chapter 794. Rinpoche was determined to get his hands on 2 killer weapons when he returned. If he couldn't get it in the country, he would turn hostile and snatch 2 from Hindustan. However, that would be too risky. Even if he managed to snatch it from Hindustani, the yield might not be suitable. They were inside the cave and were less than 10 miles away from the herdsmen. Only the herdsmen were within 2 to 3 miles. If the yield was too high, then it would become mutual destruction. As the 2 of them spoke, the sounds of intense collisions could be heard from the cave entrance. The sounds were especially loud as they reverberated through the belly of the mountain. Soon, it reverted to the sounds of killing jade-wasted slaves, along with shouts and curses. The Empress sent someone to investigate, and very soon, they returned with news. Your Majesty, the opponent has an expert, but he was repelled by Sir Ren's mount. But 2 of our brothers are dead. What kind of people? Is it the one with the snake tail? Rinpoche asked. I heard it's a man with horns on his head. They have really brought out all their assets. Rinpoche sneered. I'll go and take a look. The Empress walked toward the entrance of the cave. So far, there were already 3 Cardinal Heaven-level experts who had appeared. Previously, he had killed 1, so there were still 2 left. There could be more in the dark. Under such circumstances, only the Empress could control the situation. You should leave now. Don't worry, they can't come in, the Empress said to Rinpoche. If they were in the outside world, 300 winged cavalry warriors wouldn't be able to hold out for long against tens of thousands of jade-wasted slaves. However, since there was only one way out of the cave, the much stronger winged cavalry warriors could definitely hold out for a period of time. Your Majesty, I will return as soon as possible. Outside the cave, 2 miles away, more than 20 figures stood scattered there, staring at the dark green light that filled the sky, as well as the cave entrance that was surrounded. That cave has no other exit, someone said. Once the hundreds of thousands of jade-wasted slaves landed on the mountain, they would be able to cover every inch of the surrounding 10 miles. Therefore, they immediately knew that there was only one entrance to the cave. They're digging their own graves, aren't they? A herder said calmly. One hole is too slow to attack. With them guarding the cave entrance, it was unknown how many jade-wasted slaves would die. We can dig 2 more holes in the mountain, another herdsman said. There's no need to open another tunnel. Their leader was very strong. Just now, that genius of the Green Jiao clan was shattered in a single exchange. If they opened the hole, they could keep the others but not her. Just like that, he dragged her here and slowly whittled away her strength. They are trapped inside without water or food. When she is tired, she will kill all of them in one fell swoop. 400,000 jade-wasted slaves. They won't be able to escape. Now, we'll just have to see how much damage there is. They used a type of poison specifically targeted at jade-wasted slaves, but it didn't do any harm to the others. One of them is an expert in using poison. The Aboriginals aren't good at using poison. Could it be that other than the one with the chinchilla bloodline, there's also someone from the Myriad blood pool mixed in? The Myriad blood pool is long dead. There might be a fish that slipped through the net. That's impossible. I didn't see those filthy things from the blood pool. I could smell their stench even from 10 miles away. There's no need to discuss this. Just wait here. There are 400,000 jade-wasted slaves and 8 creatures from different races. They can only hold on for 7 days at most. There are only 7 left now. It's a pity for that genius of the Green Jiao clan. I spent a lot of effort to train him. If he was given time, he might have reached Lu Sheng's level. Rinpoche and the others guessed that there were more than 150,000 jade-wasted slaves, but in fact, there were more than 400,000. However, a large portion of them was blocked at the back, so Rinpoche and the others didn't see it. The 400,000 jade-wasted slaves were all at or close to the man-wheel level. They also had agility and flying talents that ordinary people didn't have. This force could easily destroy a country. When Rinpochian returned to Earth, he saw Lin Chaola sleeping soundly on his bed. Even her belly was exposed, and she was drooling. There were candy wrappers all over the bed. These days on Earth, Lin Chaola was no different from a mouse in a granary. At the thought of fighting to the death on the other side, Lin Chaola was eating, sleeping, and eating here. Rinpochian wanted to give her a kick on the butt. Then, Rinpochian gave her a kick on the butt. As usual, Lin Chaola jumped up and gave him 2 paws. However, Rinpochian, who was already prepared, only had 2 rows of white marks on his arms. "Why did you kick me?" Lin Chaola glared at Rinpochian. Her small canine teeth were grinding, and it looked like she was going to bite him twice. "Pack up and follow me out to do something." Rinpochian looked at the sky. It was only morning. After changing his clothes, Rinpochian took Lin Chaola to the Messier 87 department. On the way, they could occasionally see flying motorcycles flying across the sky. Today's flying motorcycles couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as they were 10 years ago. Whether it was speed, load capacity, flexibility, or other aspects, they had completely reached the standard of transportation. In foreign countries, this new type of transportation that had emerged in recent years wasn't rare. However, in China, air traffic control had never been relaxed, and flying motorcycles could only be used by the police and some special departments in the city. When they arrived at the Messier 87 department, Rinpochian wiped his face. His original calm expression disappeared, as if he had changed his face. Instead, it was full of solemnity and contained traces of suppressed madness. Looking at himself in the rearview mirror, Rinpochian was very satisfied. He was a movie king who had been held up. After getting out of the car, Rinpochian walked quickly to the elevator. He deliberately exerted some force with each step, and each step made people feel the ground tremble slightly. Along the way, the staff of the Messier 87 department who saw Rinpochian all moved to the side of the road, completely unaware of what was going on. "I want to see Yang's son immediately." When Rinpochian was stopped, he said to the guard with a cold face. 5 minutes later, Rinpochian saw Yang's senator in fact. Yang's son already knew when he came out of the villa. After so many years, Yang's son had also aged from his 40s to his 50s. He had dealt with Rinpochian many times, but this was the first time he had seen such an expression on Rinpochian's face. The moment he saw Yang's son muttered to himself, "What exactly happened? There shouldn't be anyone who provoked him, right? What had happened in the blessed heavenly abode?" The other party's first words confirmed his judgment. Rinpochian sat on the sofa, and the entire sofa sank, making a creaking sound. "I want a nuclear bomb." Yang Sen's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't mentioned this matter for all these years. Why did he bring it up again? "I want a small nuclear bomb. I must have it." Rinpochian enunciated each word clearly. "Look at my expression. I'm not joking. After so many years, you should know that I don't offend people if they don't offend me. Don't worry that my art on earth will explode." Yang Sen's heart skipped a beat again. Rinpochian's expression made him feel that the other party wouldn't back down easily this time. In particular, the trace of madness in his eyes made him wonder if the other party would do anything to him if he were to reject him. "Old friend, I'll definitely help you if I can, but I can't make the decision on this matter. You should also know that nuclear bombs involve too many things." Yang Sun sighed. "Then get someone who can make the decision. I'll give you 10 minutes. Rinpochian said, "I can only contact you. I can't guarantee when the higher-ups will have time." Yang Sun said, "Cooperation requires mutual provision of resources and exchange of resources. I've done enough over the years. As for your feedback, you should be clear that it's dispensable. If you still use words like involving too many things to brush me off when I need it, this isn't the way to cooperate." Rinpochian stared at Yang Sun and exuded the aura of an earth wheel expert. He stared at the other party as if he was staring at his prey, causing Yang Sun to break out in a cold sweat. "Don't be impatient. If you continue like this, I'm going to have a heart attack." Yang Sun laughed bitterly. "You should at least let me contact the higher-ups first, right? Then you can talk." This is all I can do. Chapter 795. After 2 hours, Rinpoche finally got a satisfactory result. Things were easier than expected, which put Rinpoche in a good mood. What he didn't know was that his previous reputation wasn't very good. He had killed the Jean family in Shurchen. Although he was passive, many people thought that he had gone too far when he killed the entire family. They labeled him as a cold-blooded murderer. In addition to the things that he and the Empress had done while escaping, they had also killed quite a number of people. Furthermore, the Empress had the ability to kill anyone within the boundaries of a city. All of this made the country wary of the two of them. When they first returned to China, the relevant authorities rated them as SSS, the highest level of danger. Now that 8 or 9 years had passed, other than being provoked once and getting angry, Rinpoche had been well-behaved the rest of the time. He had expressed his attitude that he wouldn't provoke others if they didn't provoke him. He didn't show any concern for anything on earth. Occasionally, he would appear to eat and buy, and he was a perfect example of a lazy person waiting to die. This caused his danger rating to drop from SSS to S. Although his strength had increased, his danger rating had dropped. With the foundation of their cooperation over the years, the higher-ups gave him an opening. 3 small nuclear warheads. The yield was 60 tons, 100 tons, and 200 tons respectively. The killing range was 800 meters, 1,100 meters, and 1,600 meters respectively. Within this range, there were no humans or animals. Even a man-wheel-level, jade-waisted slave wouldn't be spared within 600, 800, and 1,300 meters. In fact, Rinpoche could have gotten a bigger yield this time, but he wanted to wave the nuclear flag and show the herdsmen what prosperity, democracy, civilization, harmony, freedom, equality, justice, rule of law, patriotism, professionalism, integrity, and friendliness meant. He wanted to show them what the core values of socialism were, not to perish together with them. A bigger yield of nuclear warheads wasn't of much value to him, and he would have to take care of them instead. 2 days later, a convoy arrived at Rinpoche's villa. A group of people carefully carried down 3 silver-white metal boxes of different sizes. "Mr. Run, the things you wanted are here," a man in casual clothes said after saluting Rinpoche. "Carry it in and teach me how to use it." Rinpoche laughed. Even though he was dressed casually, even a blind man could tell his identity. "This is also my mission." The other party was straightforward, but he looked at Rinpoche with a doubtful gaze. He couldn't understand why he would give something like this to this person. Who was this person? After entering the villa, Rinpoche opened the box. There were 3 cylindrical objects that were wrapped in metal and couldn't be seen. The smallest among them was no more than 30 kilograms, and the largest was only 60 kilograms. Rinpoche reached out and touched it. He had played with guns, grenades, and artillery shells many times, but this was the first time he had played with such a high-end weapon. In particular, the meaning that this thing represented had been engraved in the hearts of every earthling. One of mankind's strongest weapons, the pinnacle of the art of explosion. Because the power was too strong, humans were afraid that they would explode along with the earth, so they had no choice but to seal it. The operation of this thing was very simple. Rinpoche didn't need any launcher at all. He could just throw it out manually when the time came. As long as the remote control was pressed, the electronic device would activate the neutron stream and detonate it. It was a foolproof one-button operation. After checking the remote control and the items, the other party saluted Rinpoche and left. Rinpoche carried the box and purchased a batch of smoked meat before traveling back to Dayo. From light to darkness, Rinpoche couldn't see anything for a moment. However, he could hear shouts coming from afar, and the location was the same as when he left. After adapting to the light in the cave, Rinpoche turned his head and saw that only 20 hours had passed. Many of the winged cavalry warriors in the cave were covered in injuries. Some of them had their faces split open, while others had huge, hideous wounds on their chests and abdomens. In addition, there was a neat row of corpses at the side. At a glance, there were at least 40 to 50 of them. "Where's Her Majesty?" Rinpoche shouted at one of the winged cavalry warriors. "At the entrance of the cave." "How's the situation?" "We can still hold on." Rinpoche threw the things on the ground and quickly walked to the entrance of the cave. He saw a black object lying beside the entrance, and after a closer look, he realized that it was the Crow General. At this time, the Crow General was in a miserable state. Its originally neat iron feathers were now damaged in many places, and one could even see the red skin underneath. One of the feathers on its neck was missing. It was unknown what kind of injuries it had sustained, but it was lying there twitching. The Crow General, who was able to escape from the Empress previously, was now in such a miserable state. This showed how intense the battle had been. After entering the cave, Rinpoche saw the dark green color at the entrance, the dancing green dots in the air, the swaying silhouettes and sabers, and the back view of the lady in red who stood there like a javelin. Rinpoche walked behind the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, I'm back." "It's good that you're back." The Empress nodded slightly. Rinpoche carefully looked at the Empress and found that she hadn't changed much since he left. The red muslin on her body was as neat as ever. This made him heave a sigh of relief. "I see that the Crow General has suffered serious injuries. Were their attacks very strong?" Rinpoche asked. A few foreigners hid among the jade-waisted slaves and launched a sneak attack. They were the ones who injured the Crow General. Most of the winged cavalry that died in battle were also killed by them. The Empress gritted her teeth. She hated those strange races to the bone. "The foreigners? How many?" "Should be 7. After you left, they were the ones who kept watch outside the cave during the day. It seems like they aren't afraid of sunlight. They're all Cardinal Heaven experts. Although they aren't very powerful, they have many strange tricks up their sleeves and are a little difficult to deal with," the Empress said. "I brought back the iron fist of socialism this time," Rinpoche said. "Is it that nuclear bomb?" The Empress turned her head and asked with a trace of anticipation in her eyes. Although Rinpoche didn't say what kind of weapon he was going to bring back, she knew that the most powerful weapon was a nuclear bomb. If it was a nuclear bomb, it would be able to teach these damn fellows a lesson. Otherwise, it would drag on for a few days. "Your Majesty is wise and powerful, and you can predict the future. This time, I really brought back a few nuclear bombs. Although they are small, they should be enough to eliminate these fellows. The only problem is, where are the herdsmen?" The Empress was elated after hearing this. After being suppressed here for a day and a night, she was excited to know that she could immediately change the situation. Chapter 796. It's already been a day. 10% of their soldiers have already lost their fighting strength. Unexpectedly, they didn't try to escape. Instead, they want to defend this place to the death. They have no food or water. The longer they stay here, the faster they will collapse. I don't think it will take 7 days. At most, they can hold on for 5 days. Don't let their leader escape. 2 kilometers away from the cave, more than 20 figures were still standing there, at least 10 meters away from each other. Occasionally, someone would say something, but they didn't care if the others replied. To them, speaking was to express their thoughts, and they had no intention of communicating with others. Several figures raised their arms and played desolate music with the animal bones in their hands, directing the jade-waisted slaves to attack. Hundreds of thousands of jade-waisted slaves surrounded the entire mountain. From the outside, one could only see a patch of green, as if it was a treasure mountain that emitted a green glow. Upon approaching, one would discover the terrifying truth of this mountain. The entire mountain was covered with a layer of jade-waisted slaves with butterfly wings and bodies and heads of humans or beasts. A portion of them were blocking the entrance of the cave and constantly attacking the interior at a rate of more than 10 per second. 7 figures of different shapes and sizes were behind these jade-waisted slaves. From time to time, they would rush into the cave and attack before retreating. Among the 7 figures, one of them had a human body and a snake tail. It was Lu Sheng, whom Rinpoche had met before. There was also a strong man with 2 horns on his head, a woman with 4 arms, and a woman who looked no different from a human but had a white tail. Just as the woman with 4 arms rushed into the cave, there was a loud bang in the cave, and she flew out. A red figure shook off the surrounding jade-wasted slaves, rushed out of the cave, and punched the woman with 4 arms repeatedly. The woman with the white tail appeared behind the Empress in an instant. Her body spun like a top, and in the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with finger shadows that pierced through space like steel spears toward the Empress. Get lost. Faced with this attack, the Empress had no choice but to stop. She turned around and punched out with her finger shadows. At the same time, Lu Sheng's fist came smashing over. Next, the man with 2 horns on his head used his white bone rod. In the blink of an eye, the Empress was surrounded by 3 people from foreign races. The other 4 were looking for an opportunity to attack. The Empress's face was covered with purple veins. She retracted her arm and punched forward like a cannon. The air in front of the Empress's fist was like a liquid, and layers of ripples appeared on the surface of the air. Soon after, the air suddenly exploded. Boom! Lu Sheng, who was at the side, was sent flying 100 meters by the Empress's punch and crashed into the ground, creating another pit. As for the Empress, she took the blow from the man with 2 horns head-on and flew back into the cave. Your Majesty, when Rinpoche saw the Empress flying back and crashing into the cave wall, he hurriedly took a few steps forward. A gold and silver spear instantly appeared in his hand. With a few points of cold light in the air, a few jade-wasted slaves that were pouncing toward the Empress turned into ashes in midair. These few shots made the winged cavalry warriors at the side praise him loudly. Rinpoche's shots were fast and accurate, and he killed 4 to 5 jade-wasted slaves in one shot. I'm fine. The water Empress fell from the wall and spat out a mouthful of blood. That blow was quite powerful, especially since she took it head-on with her back. Just spitting out a mouthful of blood was already enough to shock many people. I found their location. They're about 1 kilometer away, the Empress said. Are you all right, Your Majesty? Rinpoche was a little worried. I don't want to be entangled with them, and deliberately took the blow. The Empress obviously didn't care about spitting out blood. The 2 of them entered the cave. Rinpoche opened a few boxes, hesitated for a while, and took out the cylinder from the middle box. He placed it on the ground and said, Your Majesty, this warhead has a killing range of 1,100 meters. If it's used against those herdsmen, it won't exceed 300 meters. They're too fast, and I'm afraid that they can escape if it exceeds 300 meters. And then, the Empress looked at him. Just throw it over? Just throw it over. Then, I will detonate this warhead, which should be enough to get rid of those herdsmen. Without those herdsmen, these jade-wasted slaves won't be a problem no matter how many there are. Those foreign races might also break free from the herdsman's control. The only thing to worry about is those foreign races. They won't allow Your Majesty to act. Rinpoche frowned and looked a little worried. Even though he couldn't see what was happening outside, the Empress flew back in less than 10 seconds and even spat out some blood. From this, it could be seen that the other party wasn't easy to deal with. It doesn't matter. They can't stop me. The Empress was always full of confidence, and it was as if no one in the world could stop her. Or we can use the smallest nuclear warhead to open a path and blow up those jade-wasted slaves and foreign races outside. However, if we do this, those herdsmen will be prepared, Rinpoche said. There's no need. Just leave it to me. What can a few clowns do to me? The Empress raised her eyebrows. Even though she was wearing a bright red dress, she was full of heroic spirit. Rinpoche liked the Empress from the bottom of his heart when he saw her in this state. Just throw this within 300 meters of them, right? The Empress lifted the cylinder. It was about half the height of a person, was as thick as a bucket, and had 2 handles on the side. "Be careful, your majesty." Their leader actually rushed out and was hit by Leihua's rod. That woman is very strong. Leihua's rod will only injure her slightly. They're starting to get anxious. Humans are too affected by the lack of food and water. They won't be able to hold on for long. Humans are too affected by the lack of food and water. They won't be able to hold on for long in such a dead end. They will die inside, and they will die when they come out. Those 20 or so figures were still standing in the distance. After witnessing this scene, they exchanged a few words, which was a rare occurrence. They are the abandoned people, and they have a deep-rooted bad habit that they can't get rid of. Their only advantage is that they reproduce much faster than us. However, this is also a benefit. Because of this, we won't be lacking in food. Just as these figures were conversing, the Empress, who had just been thrown into the cave, rushed out again. She came out again? Is she courting death? As soon as the voice subsided, a silver-white object flew out from the cave with an air-piercing sound towards the herders. Is she going to throw something at us? It's a pity that I forgot how to laugh, someone said. The 20 or so herdsmen watched as the white object brushed past one of them and remained unmoved. Maybe it's poisonous, one of the herdsmen said faintly. There's no smell. If it's poisonous, it won't escape my nose. The Empress smiled as she watched the silver-white object land dozens of meters behind the herdsman, who didn't move at all. After receiving hundreds of punches from Lu Sheng, it flew back into the cave. I threw it. The Empress's voice rang in his ears. Be careful, Rinpoche said to everyone and pressed a button before the winged cavalry warriors could understand what he meant. Before the sound could be heard, a sun rose in the distance. The intense light and heat hit the jade-waisted slaves and the foreigners on the cliff. Then there was a loud bang. It was as if the sky had collapsed, causing everyone to feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. The huge shockwave caused the entire mountain to shake, making people wonder if the mountain would collapse at any moment. Chapter 797. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The winged cavalry warriors got up from the ground and looked for the Empress, only to see her standing there motionlessly. Her clothes and hair were blown back by the strong wind. Heat waves continuously swept in from outside the cave. It was as if the outside of the cave was a huge furnace. Seeing that the Empress was standing there unscathed, the winged cavalry looked around and saw the jade-waisted slaves that had been swept in by the shockwave. These fellows weren't very heavy, and they were all thrown to the wall by the shockwave. It was as if they had suffered a heavy blow and were trying to fly up. He raised his hand and swung his sword. Rays of sword gleam flashed in the cave. The winged cavalry warriors rushed out of the cave to see what was going on. The earth quaked and the mountain swayed just now, making them almost think that the sky was falling and the earth was splitting apart. Your Majesty, Rinpoche walked to the Empress's side. Wait here. I want to see, the Empress said faintly. The Empress admitted that she wouldn't be able to survive if she was at the center of the explosion, let alone the herdsmen. Although the herdsmen were fast and had many tricks up their sleeves, their bodies were very fragile and couldn't possibly survive the explosion. However, there were still a few foreign races and jade-waisted slaves outside, and they didn't know what the situation was like. At this moment, a few foreign races were thrown to the mountain wall by the shockwave, and their animal hide clothes were torn to shreds. However, their strong bodies and the fact that they were far away from the explosion caused them to not suffer much damage other than looking a little embarrassed. Even the jade-waisted slaves were smashed to the mountain wall one after another. After a while, they wobbled and flew up again. 7 foreign races came down from the mountain wall with their shredded animal hides hanging on their bodies. However, no one cared about this as they looked at the scene in the distance with shock and bewilderment on their faces. By the time they regained their senses, they were already pressed against the wall by the airflow in front of them. When they opened their eyes, they saw a huge fireball in front of them and a mushroom cloud rising in the sky. They also saw the high temperature that had been roasting them like they were facing a huge furnace. There was a huge pit in the ground in front of them, and there was a dark red liquid flowing around the pit like lava flowing down a volcano. In the distance, there was a forest that had been blown into a mess, and there were raging flames everywhere. What exactly happened? Was this a natural disaster? Their intuition told them otherwise. If it was a heavenly disaster, it wouldn't be like this. But if it wasn't a natural disaster, what was it? Also, what were those butterflies that were glowing with a dark green light all over the ground? Where was this? After recovering from their shock, the few of them scanned their surroundings. Thunderflame. When the four-armed woman saw the two-horned man, a look of hatred appeared on her face. Bye-bye clan. The burly man clearly couldn't remember who this woman was, but when he saw her 4 arms, he immediately knew who she was. I'll make you pay for what you did to Kerman today. The four-armed woman did not say a word. Her 4 arms were like machine guns as they smashed toward Lei Hua. Seeing this, the others silently distanced themselves. In fact, the 2 of them weren't the only enemies here. However, the others felt that the situation was too strange. Why were they here? Where's this place? What was going on in front? Before these doubts were cleared up, the others did not want to fight to the death here. When the Empress came out of the cave and saw this scene, a sneer appeared on her face. Had he woken up? However, he still hadn't settled the score for killing so many winged cavalry warriors. As for the surrounding jade-wasted slaves, they flew up unsteadily. After losing their command, they floated aimlessly in the air, and some of the closer ones directly pounced toward the few foreigners. After losing control of the herdsmen, the former comrades began to kill each other. The Empress ignored them and looked into the distance. There was a huge pit in a radius of hundreds of meters from the explosion site, and a layer of the ground was blown off even further away. Part of the surrounding forest was directly carbonized, while another part was burning in flames. The dark night was dyed red, and it looked like the end of the world. The power of the explosion shocked the Empress. She heard footsteps behind her. It was Rinpochian. Although Rinpochian's stature was similar to that of the winged cavalry warriors, his footsteps were much lighter and didn't match his figure. "Did you bring 3 nuclear bombs?" the Empress asked as she looked at the people below. Rinpochian looked in that direction and saw those foreigners shooting the jade-wasted slaves that pounced on them to the ground. Internal strife? Had they regained consciousness? Rinpochian asked casually. "Give me a nuclear bomb. I will throw it down and you will detonate it," the Empress said again. Even though they had regained consciousness, they still had to pay their debts. The Empress would never let her enemies go, even if they were controlled. Rinpochian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your Majesty, you have seen the power of this nuclear bomb. If it is detonated at such a close distance, the cave will definitely collapse, and we will perish together." The Empress frowned. She wasn't afraid of the 7 foreigners, but it would be difficult to kill them if they fought. The foreigners below had already discovered the 2 of them. After clearing the surroundings, they looked up and asked, "Who are you?" Are you abandoned people?" The Empress's face darkened. Once again, he heard the word abandoned people. This word made her feel very uncomfortable from the bottom of her heart. Rinpochian stepped forward and asked, "What do you mean by abandoned people?" They looked at him and then at the Empress. In their eyes, this man was too weak, but this woman was terrifying. Just looking at her gave them a sense of oppression. Seeing that he was being ignored, Rinpochian had the urge to throw the smallest nuclear bomb down and show them what the iron fist of socialism was. However, the consequences would be disastrous. Where's this place? Why are we here? Why are you all here? After the initial shock, the foreigners fell into a state of confusion. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Answer our question first. What do you mean by abandoned people? If we are satisfied, we will tell you what you want to know, Rinpochian said again. Abandoned people are abandoned people. You are humans and also abandoned people. A man with a cat-like beard and a round nose said. No matter how you looked at it, he looked like Doryman. Why do you call us abandoned people? Rinpoche couldn't figure out their true intentions. Why? The foreigners fell into a state of confusion again. She is a serpent, and I am a heaven seeker. You are humans and also abandoned people. Why do you ask why? That foreigner looked puzzled. Rinpoche looked at them and felt that it wasn't that they didn't want to answer, but that they really didn't know why they called humans abandoned people. It was as natural as calling a rabbit a rabbit. Speaking of which, he didn't seem to know why a rabbit was called a rabbit either. Everyone suddenly quieted down. Rinpoche was thinking about why a rabbit was called a rabbit. The Empress was thinking about how to kill these foreigners, and the foreigners were thinking about why they were called abandoned people. Beside them were two fellows who had been fighting fiercely ever since they regained consciousness. Messy footsteps could be heard from behind. Many winged cavalry warriors saw the Empress and Rinpoche standing at the entrance of the cave and talking to someone outside. They knew that there was no danger and rushed out. The people at the front saw the doomsday scene in the distance, stopped in their tracks, and stared dumbfoundedly. However, the people at the front stopped, but the people at the back continued to push forward. People were falling out of the cave like dumplings. Chapter 798. In the end, the Empress and the foreign races didn't fight. She was confident that she could defeat them, but she wasn't confident that she could keep them here. Although there were many winged cavalry warriors and Rinpoche around her, it seemed like they had the advantage in numbers. However, it was precisely because of them that the Empress wasn't confident that she could keep them here. Furthermore, she had a lot of questions to ask them. As for the winged cavalry warriors, they were more accepting of the fact that their enemies had become passers-by than the Empress. Although there was some resentment in their hearts, these straightforward fellows let go of their hatred when they knew that the other party was being controlled and didn't have any sanity. After all, the culprit was already dead. "Do you mean that we were being controlled?" one of the eight-armed people asked in disbelief. At this time, Rinpoche and the Empress were standing opposite those foreign races. However, these foreign races were very scattered. Not only were they unfamiliar with each other, but they even had enmity with each other. However, they weren't naked at this time. Instead, they casually covered their bodies with leaves, which could be considered clothes. What else? Did you intentionally kill 7 or 8 of us? Do you want to have a taste of my socialist iron fist? Rinpoche sneered and pointed to the big pit in the distance and the burning forest. Can you survive this blow? The eight-armed person looked at the scene after the nuclear explosion and then at Rinpoche with a face full of suspicion. After all, Rinpoche's Kismet heaven strength couldn't be hidden from them. It would be a joke to say that he could cause such a scene. Rinpoche looked at the suspicious looks on the faces of these people and calmly took out a gold and silver spear. Condensing spirit into a weapon? The foreign races were bewildered. The person in front of them was clearly at the Kismet heaven level. So how could he condense spirit into a weapon? One had to know that even they couldn't condense spirit into a weapon. Unless it was a race that specialized in the spiritual soul, ordinary cardinal heaven experts couldn't do this. Thinking back to the scene of destruction just now, a few of the alien races suddenly thought, could it be that this person has the strength of a cardinal heaven expert? After using that attack, his strength was greatly reduced, which is why he revealed the aura of a Kismet heaven expert. However, the power of that blow was something that even a cardinal heaven expert couldn't achieve. Could it be that he was a longevity heaven expert? The foreign races immediately felt deep veneration. However, if the other party was an expert of the longevity heaven realm, then how could they have survived until now after being controlled to attack this team? Without batting an eyelid, another metal chain emerged from his palm and wrapped around the spear. 2 divine weapons. They no longer dared to underestimate this Kismet heaven expert. Although the other party's strength had fallen to the Kismet heaven realm, he might be able to turn them into ashes with a single burst of power. When Rinpoche saw that the doubts on their faces had disappeared and their gazes were filled with respect, He laughed in his heart. This spear and metal chain were still somewhat useful at times. It was much easier to interrogate him after that. Among the 7 non-humankind beings in front of him, Lu Sheng, who had the bloodline of Snake Xiao and had the upper body of a human and the lower body of a snake, was a member of the snake clan. Most of them had this form, but not all of them had the bloodline of a snake cultivator. Lu Sheng's bloodline was one of the best in the serpent race. The one with a round face, a round nose, and a cat-like beard was called Qiao Sun, a member of the Heaven Seeker clan. The man with 2 horns on his head was called Lei Hua, and he was from the Thunder Barbarian tribe. The one with 4 arms was called Gu Ling, a member of the 8-armed race. The Thunder Barbarians and the 8-armed race were mortal enemies. This was obvious without saying. The woman with the furry tail was called Sun Yu, a member of the Baixiang race. The other 2 non-humankind beings were both males. One of them had hooves and was called Ta Lan, a member of the wind-chasing race. The other one was constantly secreting some kind of liquid that made his body look like it was smeared with a layer of oil. Even a fist would slip when it hit his body. His name was Su Hong, a member of the Void race. After learning about the races of these non-humankind beings, Ren Baqian became very curious. How many human-like races were there in the 60,000 mountains? These non-humankind beings didn't know the answer to this question either. From what they knew, there were about 30 races. However, there weren't many people in each race, ranging from a few thousand to a few 100,000. When Ren Baqian asked about the locations of these races, they immediately fell into a state of confusion. Who am I? Where am I? What do I want to do? They had no memory of how they had been controlled. They didn't even know where they were now, let alone where their homes were. If they wanted to go back, they would have to rely on Qiao Shan of the Heaven Seeker race. This race had a sense of smell that was 100 times more sensitive than that of a dog's, and they were also quite good at spirituality. This made Rinpochian a little curious. Firstly, he was curious about whether he would die if he was given a stink bomb. Secondly, he was curious about what this so-called spirituality was. Qiao Shen performed on the spot. He found a branch, threw it into the sky, pointed to the direction of the branch, and said, "Go in that direction, and you should be able to find your way back." Rinpochian was embarrassed. Was this the so-called spirituality? In that case, he had been very spiritual since he was a child. This is spirituality? Rinpochian didn't know what kind of expression to put on. This is spirituality. The non-humankind beings were deeply convinced. Others throw it randomly, but the Heaven Seeker race has spirituality. Therefore, they're the Heaven Seeker race. Whatever they want to do, heaven is helping them. Looking at the expressions of the non-humankind beings, Rinpochian actually started to believe it. Although it seemed ridiculous, there were too many unknowns in this world. For example, before coming to the 60,000 mountains, these non-humankind beings never knew that there were so many non-humankind races living next to the Aboriginals. Even the Aboriginals who had lived here for generations didn't know about it. Even if he saw a ghost tomorrow, Rinpochian felt that he wouldn't be too surprised. After chatting with these non-humankind beings until dawn, Rinpochian also learned some things from them. First of all, there were at least 30 humankind races in the 60,000 mountains, and he also learned some basic information about these races. Second, although these non-humankind beings had been controlled and didn't have any intelligence, Su Hong of the Void race could tell from the growth rings on his genitals that he had been alive for 76 years. When Rinpochian heard how he judged the time, he immediately became spirited again. Third, these non-humankind beings didn't know anything except for the area where they lived. Fourth, they didn't know why they were called the abandoned humans. They only knew how to call them. As for the herdsmen, they didn't know either. If Rinpochian hadn't wiped out the herdsmen this time, they probably wouldn't have known that there was a race like the herdsmen who could control others. Not only did they not know about the herdsmen, but even the chinchillas didn't know about them. This forced Rinpochian to put aside the idea of finding out about Lin Qiala's origin. At dawn, these non-humankind beings couldn't help but want to return home. After all, they had been controlled for decades, or even longer, and they wanted to go back and see how their homeworld was doing. Take this with you and open it when you encounter trouble on the way. It might be useful. Rinpoche opened a metal box and took out a silvery white cylindrical object. The Empress's eyes lit up when she saw Rinpoche's actions. Xiaoshan looked at the cylindrical object and immediately took a few steps back. He looked puzzled at first, then a trace of fear appeared on his face. If we take it, won't we die? The other non-humankind beings immediately looked at Rinpoche vigilantly. How could that be? Rinpoche laughed. It's just a small token of my appreciation. It seems like your spirituality isn't very accurate. The non-humankind beings vigilantly retreated 100 meters away before turning into shadows and disappearing into the forest. Rinpoche also began to mutter, "It seems like spirituality is really something." The Empress looked regretful. She wasn't happy that she couldn't kill these non-humankind beings. "Your Majesty, there's no other way." Rinpoche spread his hands. He knew what the Empress was thinking and was happy to avenge the winged cavalry warriors who had died in the hands of these non-humankind beings. In any case, if the Empress wanted to kill someone, he would do it for her. However, the other party actually saw the danger of the nuclear bomb. "Okay," the Empress responded softly, turned her head to look at the huge pit in the distance, and said, "Let's go and take a look." Although she knew that the herdsmen were dead when these non-humankind beings broke free from the control, she still couldn't rest assured if she didn't go and take a look with her own eyes. "Your Majesty, there's poison there," Rinpoche hurriedly said. It was much easier to say that it was poison than to explain the radiation damage. Although they were powerful, it was still right here. It was still quite dangerous to go to the center of the nuclear explosion. "Your Majesty, we will be getting married when we get back, and you still have to prepare for pregnancy. It's better to avoid things like poison," Rinpoche advised earnestly. Chapter 799. Although they couldn't go to the epicenter of the explosion, Rinpoche still accompanied the Empress around the periphery of the explosion. Although there was radiation, the physical fitness of the two of them made it so that they would not be easily affected. Looking at it from a close distance, the scene in the big pit wasn't terrifying. Instead, it was strangely beautiful. The source of this beauty was the sparse crystals in the big pit that reflected the morning sun. Are there gems underground? The Empress immediately thought of those shiny things when she saw those crystals. Although she wasn't keen on them, the ancient said that no woman could resist shiny things, whether it was gold or jewelry. Finding gems while walking was a pleasant surprise for any woman. Not to mention, a gem mine had already appeared in the Empress's mind. "Your Majesty, it's not. These are crystals condensed from some substances in the soil after being burned at a high temperature. They are actually glass," Rinpoche said with some regret. "Oh, red glass?" the Empress asked as she pointed in a certain direction. She had seen glass before, but she had never seen red glass. "Perhaps there is more iron in it," Rinpoche guessed. Before Rinpoche finished his sentence, the Empress disappeared. When she reappeared, she was holding a red gem. "Your Majesty, you can't touch these things," Rinpoche said. "I'm just taking a look." The Empress didn't take Rinpoche's advice to heart. There seems to be a mass of blood inside. The Empress used 2 fingers to hold the ruby against the sun and squinted her eyes to observe it. Rinpoche moved his head closer and found that it was indeed like a mass of liquid inside. It was dark red and looked magnificent under the sun. "There seems to be something inside." Rinpoche felt that there seemed to be a thin line swimming inside. At this moment, something strange happened. The glass shell that was wrapped in the mass of red liquid suddenly cracked. The Empress immediately threw the glass away, but at the same time, a thin blue line drilled out and went straight for Rinpoche's forehead. In the blink of an eye, the Empress's palm blocked in front of Rinpoche. However, that thin blue line was extremely agile and passed under the Empress's palm. With a flip of her palm, the Empress grabbed the blue line. However, the tip of the line, which was almost invisible to the naked eye, broke away from the blue line in the blink of an eye and went straight for Rinpoche's forehead. Rinpoche felt as if he had been hit by something. Immediately, he felt dizzy and fell backward. Rinpoche? The Empress embraced Rinpoche and carefully examined his forehead. There wasn't any wound. However, Rinpoche's eyes were tightly shut, and he seemed to have lost consciousness. Then, he looked at the blue thread in his hand. It had already turned into liquid. With a flick of the Empress's hand, it flew into the air and vaporized in an instant. The Empress's face turned gloomy. She didn't expect to be tricked. He didn't expect the herdsmen to have such a method. These herdsmen were not strong, but their methods were strange. He carried Rinpoche back to the resting area. A winged cavalry warrior came forward to report to them, but he simply waved his hand and instructed them to go hunt and prepare food. Right now, she was very annoyed. After placing Rinpoche on the ground, the Empress stretched out her hand and placed it on his shoulder. She carefully sensed the condition of Rinpoche's body and realized that there were no changes. Rinpoche's body didn't have the slightest injury. In that case, the thing that was almost invisible to the naked eye just now and Rinpoche's current coma were most likely related to his spirit. However, the problem with his spirit was what the Empress was most helpless about. This was the weakness of the Aboriginals. Hong Wan walked behind the Empress and asked softly, "Your Majesty, what's wrong with Sir Rin?" Rinpoche was still fine before, but he became like this after he and the Empress went to the explosion site yesterday. The Empress frowned. Hong Wan's voice made her even more annoyed. At this moment, Rinpoche was in the depths of darkness. In front of him, there was an existence with a dim blue glow. Is this my sea of knowledge? Rinpoche stretched out his palm, and a mass of yellow mist appeared in his palm. He was very familiar with this place. It was just that he was the controller of this place previously. At this moment, he had a physical body here and didn't have the feeling of controlling everything like before. "Who are you?" Rinpoche raised his head and looked at the figure with the blue glow in front of him. Just now, it was this person who crashed into his sea of knowledge and caused such a change. In fact, Rinpoche already knew the other party's identity. "I didn't expect that we would die in your hands. What exactly is that? How did you do it?" The blue figure let out a deep but magnetic voice. Rinpoche wanted to laugh, but the current situation made him unable to do so. "Are you struggling at death's door just to know how you died?" "No, of course not. I still have one more chance." "You are me, and I am your chance," the blue figure said. "If you satisfy my curiosity, I can also help you fulfill your last wish." Rinpoche immediately knew the other party's plan. He didn't expect that there was a way to occupy other people's bodies in this world. According to Xinshan novels, was this called possession? You don't have a chance. Let's not talk about whether you can occupy my body first. Even if you do, Zixiao can kill you in an instant along with this body. Zixiao is that female abandoned person. I will obtain your memory and occupy your body. As long as I can deceive her for a short period of time, I will be able to escape, the blue figure said in an extremely calm tone that made Rinpoche's entire body shiver. "Do you want to tell me how you do it? I can fulfill one of your last wishes." The blue figure repeated the same old topic. Rinpoche's face was gloomy as he thought about countermeasures. From the other party's words, he could tell that the other party was very confident and definitely had a countermeasure. However, he knew nothing about this and couldn't fight against the other party. If he was in the outside world, he would at least have a chance to escape. But now, he didn't even have a chance to escape. However, this was his sea of knowledge. According to the novels, he was the master of this world and should move according to his will, just like how he condensed the 5 elements previously. At the thought of this, Rinpoche felt that he wouldn't lose. He immediately looked up at the other party and asked, "Do you think you have one?" "Yes." The blue figure nodded honestly. He didn't think that Rinpoche had any possibility of defeating him. Rinpoche sneered and shouted, "Grow, grow, grow." According to his expectations, his body should be controlled according to his will in his sea of knowledge and become like a giant. Then, he would kill the other party with a slap. Just as Rinpoche had expected, the blue figure in front of him became smaller and smaller until it was only the size of a finger. Rinpoche was overjoyed. He was indeed a genius. Those Xianxia novels were still useful. Now, I am interested in answering your question. However, you have to answer one of my questions. Rinpoche was bursting with confidence and felt that he could crush the other party with one finger. The other party watched helplessly as Rinpoche became like a giant and exclaimed, "I didn't expect you to be able to comprehend this." Most people don't understand that they are the master of their own sea of knowledge. Therefore, you have the confidence to fight against me? Okay, you answer my question, and I'll answer yours. Why do you say that we are abandoned people? Rinpoche asked the question that he had always wanted to know. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.